This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since it happened, and I'm writing this partly because my therapist suggested it might help, and partly because I need to tell someone who might understand how messed up this whole thing was. I drive for Uber Eats on weekends to make extra cash. That night, it was a Friday. I'd been working late in San Francisco and decided to head back to my place in Sacramento instead of crashing at my buddy's apartment like I sometimes do. It was stupid, I know. I was already tired, but I just wanted to get home to my own bed. By the time I hit the I-80, it was around 3 in the morning. Traffic was non-existent, just me and the occasional semi-truck. My playlist had run out, so I was just listening to the hum of my Honda's engine, trying to stay alert. I remember yawning so much my jaw hurt. About an hour into the drive, somewhere between Fairfield and Davis, I noticed my fuel gauge was dangerously low, like needle barely above empty low. I must have forgotten to fill up before leaving the city. My heart sank as I realized I might get stranded on this dark stretch of highway. I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest gas station. The GPS showed one about 7 miles ahead, just off the highway on some rural road. The name wasn't familiar, something like Pine Valley Service Station. But at 4 in the morning, with an almost empty tank, I wasn't about to be picky. I took the exit and followed the directions down this narrow 2-lane road. No streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road twisted through rolling hills and farmland. Not another car in sight, just empty fields and the occasional farmhouse set way back from the road, all dark windows. After driving about 5 minutes down this road, I started getting nervous. My gas light had come on, and the station was still supposedly 2 miles away. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, silently begging my car to make it. Then I saw it, a bright glow in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the gas station sign, illuminated against the night sky. The relief I felt was immense, but as I pulled in, something felt off. The place was too bright, too clean. It looked brand new, like it had been built yesterday. The concrete was pristine white, not a single oil stain. The gas pumps gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Even the air seemed different, still and quiet, in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. It reminded me of those fake towns they build for nuclear tests. Everything perfect, but nobody actually lives there. That's what this place felt like, a movie set, not a real gas station. I pulled up to the pump and sat there for a moment, debating whether to keep going and risk running out of gas, but my gauge was now firmly on empty. I didn't have a choice. I got out and swiped my card at the pump. The machine beeped and prompted me to go inside to pay. Great. Walking toward the store, I noticed there was only one car parked on the side, an old white sedan that looked like it belonged to an employee. The store windows were so clean they were almost invisible. Through them, I could see a single person behind the counter. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. The interior was as immaculate as the outside, shelves perfectly stocked, floor polished to a shine. It didn't feel lived in, no scuff marks, no faded price tags, nothing out of place. Behind the counter stood a young woman, maybe early 20s. She was pretty in a conventional way, with long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and pale skin, but her expression, or lack thereof, made my stomach tighten. She was staring straight ahead, her face completely blank, like someone had wiped away all emotion. "Hi," I said, approaching the counter. "Pump 4 needs to be turned on." She didn't respond immediately. When she finally looked at me, her movements were stiff, almost mechanical. Her eyes met mine, but they seemed unfocused, like she was looking through me rather than at me. "Pump 4, she repeated in a flat voice. Her fingers moved across the register with precise, robotic movements. $20 minimum. I handed her my card. As she ran it, I noticed her name tag said Emily. No last name, just Emily. Slow night? I asked, trying to make normal conversation because everything felt so abnormal. Emily's eyes flicked up to me, then back down. Yes. Just that one word, no elaboration. She handed back my card and receipt. Her fingers were ice cold when they brushed against mine. I almost flinched. Thanks, I said, backing away. Have a good night. She didn't respond, just resumed her position, staring straight ahead at nothing. I practically speed walked back to my car, feeling an urgent need to get gas and get the hell out of there. As I started pumping, I kept glancing back at the store. Emily hadn't moved. She was still standing in the same position, like a mannequin. I was about halfway through filling my tank when headlights appeared on the road. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the station, moving slowly, deliberately. It parked near the store entrance, not at a pump. Two men got out. They were both wearing dark clothing. Not suits exactly, but nice pants and button-ups, like business casual. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter but stockier. They moved with purpose, not speaking to each other. Something about them made my instincts scream, danger. They entered the store. Through the windows I could see them approach the counter. The shorter one did the talking while the taller one stood slightly behind, scanning the store. Emily's posture changed immediately. She stiffened, her blank expression cracking into something like fear. I couldn't hear what was being said, but their body language was clear. This wasn't a friendly interaction. The shorter man leaned across the counter, getting in Emily's face. She shook her head. The taller man moved to the side, like he was planning to come around the counter. That's when Emily bolted. She turned and ran through a door behind the counter. The men immediately followed, the shorter one vaulting over the counter with surprising agility. I stood frozen by my car, gas nozzle still in my hand. Should I call the police? Drive away? I didn't know what I was witnessing, but it felt wrong. Then I saw Emily burst out of a side door of the building, running full speed toward the darkness beyond the gas station. The two men emerged seconds later, scanning the area. The taller one pointed in her direction, and they started jogging back to their SUV. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the look of pure terror on her face when she ran out that door. Maybe it was because I have a younger sister her age. Whatever the reason, I made a split-second decision that changed everything. I yanked the nozzle out of my car, slapped the gas cap shut, and jumped in the driver's seat. I started the engine and peeled out of the station, driving in the direction Emily had run. About 50 yards down the road, I spotted her running along the shoulder, her ponytail bouncing wildly. I pulled alongside her and rolled down the passenger window. "Get in!" I shouted. She stopped, eyes wide with fear, clearly trying to decide if I was another threat. "Those men are coming after you," I said urgently. "I saw what happened. Get in." She glanced back toward the station, then at me, making her decision in a split second. She yanked open the door and threw herself into the passenger seat. "Drive," she said, her voice suddenly much more alert and human than it had been in the store. "Just drive." I floored it. In my rearview mirror, I could see the black SUV peeling out of the gas station, its headlights gaining on us fast. "What's going on?" I asked, heart pounding as I pushed my Honda as fast as it would go. "Who are those guys?" Emily was looking behind us, her face pale in the dashboard lights. "Human traffickers," she said, her voice shaking. "They've been using that station as a pickup point. The owner's in on it. They bring girls there, keep them drugged, then move them elsewhere." My blood ran cold. "Are you—" "I was brought there 3 days ago," she cut me off. "They keep us doped up with something that makes it hard to think or move normally, but I've been hiding the pills, pretending to take them. Tonight was my chance to escape." The SUV was gaining on us. My Honda, already tired from the long drive, was no match for whatever engine they had in that thing. "We need to call the police," I said, fumbling for my phone. "No service out here," Emily said, checking her own phone. "But there's a 24-hour convenience store about 10 miles ahead with a security guard. If we can make it there." The SUV rammed us from behind. The impact sent us lurching forward, and I struggled to keep control of the car. Emily screamed, "Hold on!" I yelled, gripping the wheel with sweaty hands. The road ahead was winding through hills with sharp curves and no guardrails. In the dark, it was a nightmare to navigate at high speed. The SUV rammed us again, harder this time. My neck snapped back, then forward. A shooting pain went up my spine. "They're trying to run us off the road," Emily cried. I saw a turnoff ahead and made a split-second decision. I cut the wheel hard, taking the turn without slowing down. The tires screeched in protest and we fishtailed but somehow stayed on the road. The SUV overshot the turn and had to brake hard, buying us a few seconds. "How much further to that store?" I gasped. "Maybe 5 miles, Emily said. "Take the next right." I followed her directions, my hands shaking on the wheel. The SUV's headlights appeared behind us again, closer than ever. Then I saw it. One of the men leaning out the passenger window of the SUV, something in his hand catching the moonlight. "Get down!" I shouted, just as a loud crack split the air. Emily ducked. I hunched over the wheel, heart in my throat. They were shooting at us. Actually shooting. Another crack, and my rear window exploded inward, showering the back seat with glass. Emily screamed again, covering her head with her arms. "Almost there," she said between ragged breaths. "Next left, then it's just up ahead." I took the turn too fast, and we skidded on loose gravel. For a terrifying moment, I thought we would spin out, but somehow I managed to straighten the car. The SUV was right on our tail. They rammed us again, and this time my head hit the side window. Stars exploded in my vision. I tasted blood. I'd bitten my tongue. "There it is," Emily pointed ahead to a glowing sign in the distance. "Floor it." I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, praying my car had enough left to get us there. The engine whined in protest, but we picked up speed. We were maybe 200 yards from the store when the most unexpected thing happened. From side roads and hidden spots, police cruisers emerged, lights flashing. 1, 2, 3 of them, blocking the road ahead. Behind us, the SUV's brakes squealed as they tried to stop. I slowed down too, confused and terrified. Had we driven into some kind of police checkpoint? Then I realized they weren't stopping us. They were waiting for the SUV. As we rolled to a stop near the convenience store, police officers swarmed the SUV, guns drawn, shouting orders. The 2 men were pulled from the vehicle and forced to the ground. Emily was crying now, tears of relief streaming down her face. "They came," she whispered. "They actually came." I was completely lost. "You knew the police would be here?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "The real Emily, the girl whose place I took at the counter. She escaped last week and went to the police. They've been planning this sting operation, but they needed to catch these guys in the act of pursuing someone. When I saw my chance to run, I took it." A female officer approached our car. "Agent Santos," she introduced herself, showing a badge. "Are you two all right?" It turned out Emily was actually an undercover officer named Rebecca. The police had been investigating the trafficking ring for months, but couldn't get enough evidence. They needed to catch the transporters in the act. I had unknowingly become part of their operation. By helping Rebecca escape, I'd given them exactly what they needed. The traffickers actively pursuing a victim, with witnesses and evidence. The aftermath was a blur of statements and medical checks. My car was totaled from the damage. The bullet had missed us both by inches. I had a mild concussion from hitting my head, and we both had whiplash from the repeated ramming. They caught the 2 men, plus the gas station owner who was waiting at another location. According to what the police told me later, they found 3 more girls being held at a house nearby, all drugged and destined for transport out of state. I'm back home now, trying to process everything that happened. Every time I close my eyes, I see that too perfect gas station, Emily's blank face, the gun catching moonlight. I hear the crack of gunshots and breaking glass. I feel the impact of the SUV ramming us. The police say I helped save lives that night. Maybe that's true, but I can't shake the feeling that if I hadn't stopped at that particular gas station, if I hadn't decided to help Emily, or Rebecca, I guess, I might have driven right past a horror that happens every day without most of us ever noticing. I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop at a rural gas station again, and I definitely won't be driving alone at night anymore. The world suddenly feels much darker and more dangerous than it did before. I keep thinking about how many other places like that might exist. Perfect facades hiding terrible secrets, hiding in plain sight where anyone could stumble upon them. Story 2. Datey. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since Halloween, and every time I close my eyes, I hear those damn whispers. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. My name's Jake. I'm 17, and I live in Ravens Creek, Maine, a town so small it barely registers on most maps. Nothing ever happens here, which is probably why the four of us, me, Lily, Matt, and Sophie, were stupid enough to go to Blackwood Mansion on Halloween night. Everyone in Ravens Creek knows about Blackwood Mansion. It sits on a hill overlooking the town, this massive Victorian monstrosity that's been abandoned for over 100 years. The story goes that the Blackwood family, super wealthy industrialists or something, just vanished one night. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just gone. Their dinner was still on the table, half eaten, clothes still in closets. It was like they just disappeared mid-existence. Since then, people claim they've heard weird stuff coming from the place. Whispers, footsteps, piano music in the middle of the night, even though nobody's lived there for a century. Classic small-town ghost story stuff. I never believed any of it. We were at Matt's place that night, bored out of our minds. His parents were at some Halloween party in Portland, so we had the house to ourselves. We'd already watched 2 terrible horror movies and were halfway through a third when Sophie brought it up. We should go to Blackwood Mansion, she said, like it was nothing. Sophie's always been the adventurous one. Long black hair, dark eyes, fearless attitude. I've had a crush on her since freshman year. Are you insane? Lily shot back. Lily's the cautious one, Matt's girlfriend, always thinking things through. Matt just laughed. Come on, it'll be fun. What's the worst that could happen? I should have said something. I should have reminded them about the no trespassing signs, the rotting floors, the fact that the place was probably full of asbestos. Instead, I said, I'm in. 40 minutes later, we were standing outside the wrought iron gates of Blackwood Mansion. The moon was full that night, casting this eerie silver light over everything. The mansion loomed ahead of us, all dark windows and crumbling stone. It was bigger than I expected. 3 stories of Victorian architecture gone to seed. I can't believe we're doing this, Lily whispered, clutching Matt's arm. The gate wasn't even locked. It just creaked open when Sophie pushed it like it was inviting us in. We walked up the overgrown path to the front door, our phone flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air felt heavy, almost thick. I told myself it was just the humidity. The front door was this massive oak thing with peeling black paint. It was locked, but Matt found a broken window on the side of the house. One by one, we climbed through. I'll never forget that first moment inside Blackwood Mansion. It smelled musty, like old books and decay, but underneath there was something else, something sweet and coppery that made my stomach turn. Our flashlights revealed a grand foyer with a massive chandelier hanging above us, covered in cobwebs. A wide staircase curved up to the second floor, and long hallways stretched into darkness on either side. Holy shit, Matt whispered, his voice echoing slightly. This place is massive. And creepy as hell, I added, trying to sound braver than I felt. Sophie was already exploring, her flashlight beam dancing across peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture draped in sheets. It's like they just left everything, she said, lifting the corner of one sheet to reveal an ornate side table. We should stick together, Lily suggested, but Sophie was already halfway across the foyer. Come on, we'll cover more ground if we split up, she called back. Jake and I will check upstairs. You and Matt take the ground floor. Before Lily could protest, Sophie was at the staircase motioning for me to follow. I glanced at Matt, who just shrugged. Meet back here in 30 minutes, he said, taking Lily's hand. I followed Sophie up the stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wood. At the top was a long hallway with doors on both sides. Most were closed. but one at the end stood slightly ajar. "Let's check that one," Sophie said, already moving toward it. The room turned out to be a bedroom. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center, its once fine curtains now tattered and moth-eaten. A clouded mirror hung on one wall, reflecting our flashlight beams in a murky haze. The air in here was even colder, and I could see our breath fogging. "Check this out," Sophie said, pointing her light at a vanity table. Hairbrushes, perfume bottles, and jewelry boxes sat arranged as if waiting for their owner to return. While Sophie examined the vanity, I noticed a small desk in the corner. On it sat a leather-bound book. I picked it up, blowing off a thick layer of dust, and opened it. It was a journal. The handwriting was elegant but frantic, growing more erratic with each entry. I skimmed through the pages, my skin crawling. October 3rd, 1908. The whispers have started again. Charles says I'm imagining things, but I know what I hear. They come from the walls at night, calling my name. October 10th, 1908. Elizabeth was sleepwalking again last night. Found her standing in front of the parlor piano at 3 in the morning. She doesn't remember getting out of bed. October 25th, 1908. Something is watching us. I can feel eyes on me constantly. The servants are leaving one by one. They know. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1908, exactly 115 years ago to the day. They're in the house now. They're in the mirrors, in the shadows. They whisper constantly, "God help us." "Sophie," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "we need to go." But Sophie wasn't listening. She was staring at the clouded mirror, her flashlight pointed at it. "Jake," she said, slowly, "do you see that?" I looked at the mirror. At first I saw nothing but our dim reflections. Then I noticed it. The darkness behind us seemed to be moving, shifting like smoke. And in that smoke, I swore I could see faces. "It's just our imagination," I said, but my voice cracked. "The stories about this place are getting to us." That's when we heard the scream from downstairs. We ran back to the hallway and toward the stairs. The temperature had dropped dramatically. I could see ice crystals forming on the banister as we passed. Our flashlights began to flicker, and the shadows along the walls seemed to stretch and move as we ran. And then I heard them, the whispers. They started as a faint buzz, like distant conversation, but grew louder with each step. I couldn't make out words, just a chorus of urgent, angry hissing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Do you hear that?" I gasped as we reached the bottom of the stairs. Sophie's face was pale. "We need to find Matt and Lily, now." We found them in what must have been the parlor, a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a grand piano in the center. The piano bench had been knocked over, and both Matt and Lily were pressed against the far wall, their faces masks of terror. "The piano," Matt stammered when he saw us. "It was playing by itself. The keys were moving." "We tried to leave," Lily added, her voice shaking, "but the door slammed shut. We couldn't open it." "We're leaving, right now," I said, grabbing Sophie's hand. Matt took Lily's, and we headed for the foyer. That's when things got really bad. The whispers grew louder, becoming a roar of voices that seemed to penetrate my skull. The temperature plummeted further. I could see frost forming on the walls. Our flashlights died completely, leaving us in darkness broken only by moonlight through the dirty windows. And the hallway to the foyer, it was wrong. It stretched before us, seeming impossibly long. We ran, our footsteps echoing, but the exit seemed to get no closer. The whispers became words I could almost understand, angry, hungry words that made my skin crawl. The shadows along the walls began to take shape, human figures that reached toward us with elongated fingers. I felt something cold brush against my cheek and jerked away. "Don't look at them," Sophie gasped beside me. "Just keep running." We ran until our lungs burned, the exit door still impossibly distant. Then suddenly, it was right in front of us, as if the hallway had snapped back to its normal dimensions. We burst through the door and tumbled onto the front steps of Blackwood Mansion. The whispers stopped the moment we crossed the threshold. The night was silent except for our panicked breathing. We didn't stop running until we reached the gate. Looking back, the mansion stood silent and dark, as if nothing had happened. But I knew, we all knew, what we'd experienced inside. "We never talk about this," Matt said as we walked back to his house. "To anyone, ever." We all agreed, but the thing is, I can't stop thinking about it. About those whispers, about what I read in that journal. The nightmares started the next night. In them, I'm back in that bedroom, reading the journal. But when I look up, I'm alone. The door is closed, and in the clouded mirror, faces press against the glass from the other side, mouths moving in silent whispers. I've researched the Blackwood family since then, found old newspaper articles about their disappearance. There were 5 of them, Thomas and Margaret Blackwood, their children Elizabeth and James, and Thomas's brother Charles. They vanished on Halloween night, 1908, the same night as that last journal entry. The thing that keeps me up at night, though, in all my research, I never found out who wrote that journal. It wasn't Margaret. The handwriting doesn't match letters she wrote that are preserved in the local historical society. It wasn't Elizabeth. She was only 7 when they disappeared. So who was writing about the whispers? And why do I still hear them when I'm falling asleep? I haven't told the others, but I think something followed us out of that house. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see shadows moving where they shouldn't be, and my bedroom mirror. I've covered it with a sheet. I don't know what happened in Blackwood Mansion 115 years ago. I don't know what's still there, but I know we disturbed something that Halloween night. Something that had been waiting a very long time, and I think it's still waiting, for us. Story 3. I never believed in the supernatural or anything like that. I'm a pretty down-to-earth person who needs concrete evidence before I'll buy into something. But what happened to me last year in Denver, I still can't explain it. I've been wanting to share this for a while, but honestly, I've been too scared. Even typing this makes my hands shake. It started when I moved into my new house in a quiet suburb just outside Denver. Nothing fancy, just a modest 2-story with a small yard and decent neighbors, or so I thought. I got a great deal on it, probably because it was a bit older than the surrounding homes. The previous owners had moved out suddenly for family reasons, which didn't raise any red flags at the time. I'd been there about 2 weeks, still unpacking boxes and getting settled. The first strange thing happened on a Wednesday morning. I was heading out to work and found an envelope that had been slipped under my front door overnight. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in this weird, shaky handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message. "I see you. I know what you're doing. Don't think you're safe." My first thought was that some neighborhood kids were playing a prank on the new guy. I laughed it off and threw it in the trash. Looking back, I wish I had taken it more seriously. That weekend, I was doing some yard work, getting to know the place better. I had this little garden gnome the previous owners had left behind. Nothing special, just this cheerful little guy with a red hat. I'd placed him near my mailbox. When I came back from mowing the backyard, he was turned around, facing my house instead of the street. I figured maybe I'd bumped him earlier without noticing, but the next day he was moved again. This time to the other side of the yard. I definitely hadn't touched him. That's when I started getting uneasy. Then there was the mailbox. I went to check it one afternoon and found it open, my mail scattered on the ground. Nothing was missing, just disorganized, like someone had gone through it in a hurry. And when I went to close it, I noticed these small indentations on the metal, almost like fingerprints, but longer, more like claw marks. I started paying more attention to my surroundings after that. That's when I noticed her, Mrs. Peterson. She lived in the house directly across the street. She was this tall, stern-looking woman, probably in her 60s, with silver hair always pulled back in a tight bun. I'd wave when I saw her trying to be neighborly, but she never waved back. She would just watch from her window or her porch, her eyes following me as I moved around my yard or got in my car. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just curious about the new neighbor. Maybe she was lonely, but there was something in her gaze that felt almost predatory, like she was studying me, waiting for something. About 3 weeks after moving in, I came home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. I know I locked it that morning. I'm obsessive about checking the lock before I leave. I stood on my porch for a good 5 minutes, debating whether to go in or call the police. Finally, I pushed the door open and went inside, grabbing a baseball bat from my sports equipment in the hallway. Closet. Nothing was missing. Nothing was even out of place, except for a note on my kitchen counter. A handwritten note that said, "You're not alone." The same handwriting as the letter from before. I called the police. They came, took a report, looked around, found no signs of forced entry. They suggested I might have forgotten to lock the door properly, or that maybe the lock was faulty. They said they'd do extra patrols in the area, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, small creaks and shuffling sounds that could have been the house settling but felt like something more. Around 3 in the morning my phone rang. I answered, but there was nothing. Just silence, then a soft click as they hung up. This happened again the next night and the night after that, always at 3 a.m. I installed security cameras the following weekend, front door, back door, and one facing my driveway. I felt a bit ridiculous doing it, but I needed to know what was going on. The first 2 nights the cameras caught nothing unusual. On the third night at 2:45 in the morning, the front camera picked up a figure moving across my yard. They were wearing what looked like a long dark coat with a hood pulled up, making it impossible to see their face. They stood at the edge of my property for nearly 10 minutes, just looking at my house. Then they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between the streetlights. I took the footage to the police the next day. They said they'd look into it, but reminded me that standing on a public sidewalk wasn't a crime. They suggested it might be a teenager or someone homeless passing through the area. That same day, I decided to confront Mrs. Peterson. I'd seen her watching me from her window again that morning, and something about her gaze made my skin crawl. I walked across the street and knocked on her door. She answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting for me. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was surprisingly soft for someone with such a severe appearance. I tried to be casual, asking if she'd noticed anyone strange in the neighborhood lately. I mentioned the figure on my security camera and the notes. She just stared at me for a long moment before saying, "I know who you are, and I know why you're here." The way she said it made my blood run cold. It wasn't threatening exactly, it was knowing, like she had some secret information about me. "I'm just trying to live in my new home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. We all have our reasons for being where we are. Not all homes want new occupants. Before I could respond, she closed the door in my face. I walked back to my house feeling like I was being watched from every window on the street. That night, I woke up around 2:30 to a scratching sound coming from above me. It sounded like it was coming from the attic. Soft at first, then more insistent. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like someone, or something, was trying to get out. I lay there frozen in my bed, listening as the scratching moved across the ceiling, following the layout of the attic. Then it stopped, directly above my bed. I heard what sounded like a sigh, then silence. The next morning, I gathered my courage and checked the attic. The access panel in the hallway ceiling had these marks around the edges, scratches that looked like they'd been made from the inside. The panel itself was still securely closed, but those marks, they hadn't been there when I moved in. I'm certain of it. I decided not to open the panel. Instead, I went outside to clear my head. That's when I saw them. Symbols scratched into the dirt at the edge of my property, near where my yard met Mrs. Peterson's. They looked like nothing I'd ever seen before, curved lines connecting to form shapes that seemed to shift if you looked at them too long. I took photos with my phone and went back inside. I spent hours online trying to identify them. Eventually, I found matches on some obscure websites about occult practices. They were supposedly protective sigils, meant to contain something. But contain what? The next day, I confronted Mrs. Peterson again. This time she was in her yard, tending to these strange purple flowers I'd never seen before. "What are those symbols?" I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. She looked up at me with those piercing eyes. "Some things are better left undisturbed. You don't understand what you're meddling with." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. She sighed like I was a disappointing student who couldn't grasp a simple concept. "I'm trying to protect you. This house, your house, it has history. History that should stay buried." "What history? What are you talking about?" But she just shook her head and went back inside, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. That night, the scratching in the attic was louder, more frantic, and I swear I heard whispering, soft, unintelligible words that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. My phone rang at 3 a.m. again, and this time, when I answered, I heard breathing. Then a voice whispered, "Let me in," before the line went dead. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and drove to a hotel for the night. As I was leaving, I saw Mrs. Peterson standing at her window watching me. For the first time, she looked worried. I did some research on the history of my house that night from my hotel room. It took some digging, but I found out that 20 years ago a family had disappeared from that house, just vanished one night, leaving everything behind. Their car was still in the garage, dinner half eaten on the table. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. They were just gone. The article mentioned that a neighbor had reported strange noises coming from the house the night before they disappeared. Scratching sounds, whispers. I called a realtor the next morning and put my house on the market. I didn't care about taking a loss. I just wanted out. I went back only to pack my essential belongings, always during daylight hours, always with a friend. On my last visit, Mrs. Peterson was waiting for me on my porch. She handed me a small cloth bag filled with herbs and what looked like salt. "Keep this with you," she said. "It won't stop it, but it might slow it down." "Stop what?" I asked. "It's attached to you now," she replied. "Not the house. You. You opened something when you moved in, something that should have stayed closed." I left Denver that day and never went back. I moved 2 states away, changed my phone number, even changed jobs. For a while, I thought I was safe. The scratching stopped. The phone calls stopped. But last week, I saw her, Mrs. Peterson, standing across the street from my new apartment, watching me. When our eyes met, she shook her head slowly, like she was disappointed in me. I blinked, and she was gone. Last night, I woke up to scratching above my bed, and this morning, there was a note on my kitchen counter. "You're not alone." I don't know what to do. I don't know what's happening to me. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever was in that house in Denver, whatever Mrs. Peterson was trying to contain with those symbols, it followed me, and I don't think it's ever going to let me go. Story 4. I've been sitting on this experience for 3 years now, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've gone back and forth about sharing this online, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help make sense of it all. Back in 2019, my group of friends decided to do a week-long camping trip in the Appalachian Mountains in Northern California. There were 6 of us total: me, Elijah, Robert, Claire, Denise, and Banner. We'd been friends since college, and this was our 3rd annual camping trip together. Banner was always the outdoorsy one, practically grew up in the woods according to his parents. He'd mapped our route, packed all the right gear, and was essentially our unofficial guide. The first day went exactly as planned. We hit the main Appalachian Trail early, around 7 in the morning. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the high 60s. Banner spotted this smaller trail branching off the main path around midday. It wasn't on our original route, but Banner insisted it would lead to an amazing camping spot he'd read about online. None of us questioned it because, well, that was Banner, always finding the hidden gems that tourists missed. The side trail was barely visible, overgrown with vegetation like it hadn't been used in years. We had to push through thick bushes for about 40 minutes before reaching this small clearing surrounded by towering pines. I remember feeling uneasy even then. The clearing was perfectly circular, almost unnaturally so, but everyone else was too tired to notice or care. We set up our 3 tents, built a fire pit, and started preparing dinner. Around 8 that evening, with the sun starting to set, Banner mentioned he needed to take a leak and walked toward the edge of the clearing. I remember the last words he said were, "Don't eat all the trail mix while I'm gone," with that stupid grin of his. We all laughed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. At 30 minutes, Elijah joked that Banner must have fallen in. At 45 minutes, the joke stopped and worry set in. "He wouldn't wander off," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. "He knows better than that." We started calling his name, first casually, then with increasing panic as our voices echoed back with no response. Robert grabbed his flashlight and headed in the direction Banner had gone. Elijah followed. Claire, Denise, and I stayed, at camp in case he returned. An hour later, Robert and Elijah came back, visibly shaken. "There's nothing out there," Robert said, running his hands through his hair. "We went at least half a mile in every direction. It's like he just vanished." We decided to split up and search in teams. Claire twisted her ankle about 20 minutes in, so I volunteered to take her back to camp while the others continued searching. Part of me felt guilty for not helping more, but someone had to stay with Claire, and I've never had the best night vision anyway. Back at camp, Claire and I kept the fire going bright, hoping it would guide Banner back if he was lost. We blew our emergency whistles every 15 minutes. The others returned around midnight, exhausted and empty-handed. "We need to get help," Denise said, her voice hoarse from calling Banner's name for hours. We agreed to wait until morning. If Banner hadn't returned by then, Elijah and Robert would hike back to the main trail to find cell service or other hikers who could help. That's when things got weird. Around 2 in the morning, I was still awake, staring at the fire, when I heard rustling from the bushes at the edge of the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, heart racing, thinking Banner had finally found his way back. I called out his name, but no response came. The rustling continued, circling around our campsite like something was pacing just beyond where my flashlight could reach. Then I heard it, a soft humming. It sounded like a young girl, humming a melody I didn't recognize. The sound sent shivers down my spine. We were miles from civilization, on an unmarked trail. There shouldn't be a child anywhere near us. I woke Elijah, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what I was hearing. He listened for a moment, his face paling as he heard it too. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. We woke the others. For nearly 20 minutes we sat in terrified silence as the humming circled our camp, never getting closer, never revealing its source. Every time we pointed our flashlights toward the sound, there was nothing there, just trees and darkness. Around 3 in the morning, the humming stopped abruptly. None of us slept after that. At first light, Elijah and Robert packed light bags and headed back to the main trail to find help. The rest of us stayed at camp, hoping against hope that Banner would stumble back on his own. By noon, park rangers arrived with search dogs. They asked us detailed questions about Banner, what he was wearing, his physical condition, if he had any medical issues or reasons to wander off intentionally. They seemed skeptical when we mentioned the humming, exchanging glances that made my stomach twist. "There have been reports of wildlife mimicking human sounds in these parts," one ranger explained, not meeting my eyes. "Mountain lions sometimes make noises that sound human-like." but I know what I heard. That wasn't an animal. The search continued for 3 more days. Each night, the rustling and humming returned, always staying just beyond our sight. The rangers claimed they didn't hear anything, but I caught one of them crossing himself when he thought no one was looking. On the 4th day, 2 hikers found Banner nearly 7 miles from our campsite, in the opposite direction from the main trail. He was severely dehydrated, covered in dirt, and acting strangely aggressive. When the rangers brought him to us before taking him to the hospital, I barely recognized my friend. His eyes were wide and unfocused, and he kept muttering about lights in the trees. At the hospital, blood tests revealed an unknown substance in Banner's system, something the doctors couldn't identify but said resembled certain hallucinogens. They suspected someone had drugged him, but how? Who? We hadn't seen another soul since leaving the main trail. Banner couldn't remember anything after walking away from our camp. The only thing he could recall was seeing a strange glow coming from high up in a tree. Then everything went blank. He had no explanation for how he ended up miles away, or why he was missing for 4 days, or what had happened to his backpack and phone, which were never recovered. The rangers found no evidence of other people in the area. No footprints besides ours, no campsites, nothing to suggest who might have drugged Banner or where the humming came from. We cut our trip short and went home the next day. None of us felt safe staying any longer. The drive back was mostly silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Banner sat in the back seat, staring out the window, flinching whenever we passed through shadowy areas under the trees. In the months that followed, we tried to piece together what happened. Banner saw a therapist for a while, hoping hypnosis might recover his lost memories, but it never worked. The doctors never identified the substance in his system. The park rangers filed a report, but eventually closed the case as an unexplained disappearance and recovery, with suspected recreational drug use as a contributing factor, which is ridiculous because Banner didn't do drugs. What bothers me most, even now, is the humming. I've replayed that sound in my head thousands of times. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear it outside my bedroom window. Banner's changed since that trip. He used to be the first one to suggest outdoor adventures, but now he refuses to go camping or even hiking. He jumps at unexpected noises and sleeps with the lights on. Whatever happened to him out there, it broke something inside him that hasn't healed. I've researched similar incidents in those mountains and found a few vague forum posts about hikers experiencing lost time or hearing unexplained sounds. Some local legends mention spirits that lure travelers off marked paths. Most people dismiss these as campfire stories, but after what we experienced, I'm not so quick to judge. I still can't explain what happened to Banner in those mountains. Who or what drugged him? What was that humming in the darkness? How did he end up 7 miles away with no memory of how he got there? And why do I still feel like we're being watched whenever I think about that trip? We all agreed never to go back to that spot again. Whatever's in those woods, it's not natural and it's not friendly. I still have nightmares about that perfectly circular clearing and the way the trees seem to bend inward, watching us. Sometimes I dream I'm the one walking into the woods alone, and I see that light Banner mentioned, glowing high up in the branches. In the dream, I always walk toward it. Even though every instinct screams at me to run, I wake up before I reach it. Part of me is grateful for that. The other part wonders if Banner wasn't so lucky. Story 5. I haven't been able to sleep properly for the past 3 years. Every time I close my eyes, I see those faces in the darkness, hear those screams, and feel that cold dread washing over me again. I've tried therapy, medication, even moved to a different state, but nothing helps. What happened during that hunting trip in the Appalachians haunts me every single day. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway with my 3 closest friends from college, Jackson, Michael, and David. We'd been planning this hunting trip for months, a chance to disconnect from our busy lives and reconnect with each other. Jackson had an uncle who owned a patch of land near the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, deep in the Appalachians. It seemed perfect, secluded, peaceful, with plenty of deer, according to Jackson. We arrived on a Friday morning in early October. The weather was perfect. Crisp autumn air, leaves changing colors, that earthy smell of the forest. We parked Jackson's truck at the trailhead and loaded up our backpacks with enough supplies for 3 days. Between the four of us, we had 2 rifles and Jackson's shotgun. I wasn't much of a hunter myself, but I enjoyed the hiking and camping part of these trips. The first few hours were exactly what we'd hoped for. We hiked about 5 miles into the wilderness, following game trails and taking in the scenery. David was tracking some deer prints when it happened. He stepped wrong on some loose rocks, twisted his ankle, and went down hard. We could tell immediately it wasn't just a minor sprain. His ankle swelled up fast, and he couldn't put any weight on it. "Guys, I'm really sorry," David kept saying as we fashioned a makeshift splint using some branches and a first aid kit. Michael checked the map and said there was supposed to be a service road about 2 miles north of us. If we could get there, we might be able to call for help or flag down a vehicle. With David leaning on me and Jackson, we started making our way slowly through the increasingly dense forest. That's when I first felt like something was off. You know that feeling when you're being watched? The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. At first I thought it was just nerves, but then Michael stopped suddenly. "Did you guys see that?" he whispered, pointing toward a cluster of trees about 50 yards away. We all stopped and looked. For a second, I didn't see anything. Then I caught a glimpse of movement, someone ducking behind a tree, not an animal, a person. "Hello?" Jackson called out. "We've got an injured hiker here. Could use some help if you're a ranger." No response, just silence, not even birds chirping anymore. "Let's keep moving," I said, suddenly eager to get out of there. As we continued, I kept seeing glimpses of figures in the trees, not just one, but several, keeping pace with us from a distance. They never came close enough for us to make out any details, just shadowy outlines moving through the forest. None of us wanted to acknowledge what we were seeing, so we just pushed forward faster, half carrying David, who was now visibly frightened too. The sun was starting to set when Jackson spotted a cabin through the trees. It wasn't on our map, but at that point, we were desperate for shelter and help for David. As we approached, I saw smoke coming from the chimney. Someone was home. Jackson went ahead and knocked on the door while the rest of us waited at the edge of the small clearing surrounding the cabin. A tall, gaunt man with a gray beard opened the door. He looked surprised to see Jackson, but after a brief conversation, he waved us all over. "Got an injured man here," the stranger said, eyeing David's ankle. "Better come inside before dark. They get more active after sunset." The way he said "they" sent chills down my spine, but we were in no position to refuse shelter. The cabin was small but tidy. One main room with a kitchenette, a wood stove, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. What caught my attention immediately were the knives. There must have been 30 or 40 of them displayed on one wall. Hunting knives, machetes, even what looked like military combat knives. The man introduced himself as Earl. He said he'd lived in these mountains for 20 years, mostly keeping to himself. As he helped us get David settled on a chair, I noticed his hands were rough and scarred, with dirt or something dark embedded under his fingernails. "What brings you boys out this far?" Earl asked, putting a kettle on the stove. "Not many hunters come to this valley anymore." We explained about our trip, Jackson's uncle's land, and how we'd gotten lost after David's injury. Earl nodded, occasionally glancing out the window as the forest darkened outside. "You're pretty far off from where you think you are," he said finally. "This ain't national forest land. This here's private property, mine and some others scattered around. We're sorry for trespassing," Michael said. "We can head out. Tomorrow once—" "Oh, you ain't trespassing on my account," Earl interrupted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's them others you'd be worried about. Mountain folk. Been here longer than the roads. Don't take kindly to outsiders." My stomach tightened. "Are those the people we saw in the woods?" Earl's expression changed, becoming more focused, almost predatory. "You saw them, did you? How many?" "I'm not sure. I said hesitantly. Maybe 3 or 4. They were keeping their distance. Earl stood up suddenly and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. Then he walked to his wall of knives and selected a large hunting knife, testing its edge with his thumb. "They're getting bolder," he muttered, almost to himself. "Coming closer to the cabin these days." David shot me a panicked look. We all felt it. Something was very wrong here. "Who exactly are these people?" Jackson asked carefully. Earl turned to us, still absently running his thumb along the knife blade. "Some call them mountain people. Been inbreeding up here for generations. Hardly human anymore, if you ask me." He chuckled. "I've been hunting them for years now. Thinning the herd, you might say." The casual way he said it, like he was talking about deer or rabbits, made my blood run cold. I looked at my friends and saw the same horrified realization dawning on their faces. This man wasn't talking about animal hunting. "You hunt people?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Earl shrugged. "Calling them people is generous. They're more like animals now. Live in caves and old mine shafts. Steal what they need. Attack if cornered." His eyes lit up, but they bleed just the same. I felt sick. We'd stumbled into the cabin of what appeared to be a serial killer, someone who had been systematically hunting and killing an isolated community in these mountains. "Look," Earl continued, misreading our horror as interest. "I can show you some of my trophies if you're curious. Got a collection in the back room." "That's okay," I said quickly. "We should probably get some rest. It's been a long day." Earl seemed disappointed but nodded. "Suit yourself. You boys can take the floor in here. I got some spare blankets. I'll be up for a while yet. Got some preparations to make for tomorrow." None of us slept that night. We whispered among ourselves, trying to figure out what to do. David couldn't walk. We were miles from anywhere, and our phones had no signal. Earl stayed up late, sharpening knives and occasionally mumbling to himself. Every now and then he'd go outside, circling the cabin with a rifle before coming back in. Around 3 in the morning, I was drifting in and out of an uneasy doze when a loud explosion shook the cabin. We all jumped up as Earl rushed to the window, a disturbing look of glee on his face. "Got 'em!" he shouted. "Booby trap worked. Been setting those up all around the perimeter last few weeks." He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. "You boys stay put. I'm gonna go check how many I got." The moment he was out the door, Jackson turned to us. "We need to get the hell out of here now." "But David," I started. "I can manage," David insisted, already struggling to his feet. "I'd rather crawl through these woods than stay here another minute." We gathered our things as quietly as possible and slipped out the back door while Earl was still off in the woods. The night was pitch black, with only a sliver of moon providing any light. We had one flashlight between us, which we used sparingly as we half-carried David away from the cabin. We'd made it maybe a quarter mile when we heard it, a woman's scream so full of pain and terror that it didn't sound human. It echoed through the trees, followed by Earl's distant laughter. "Oh, God," Michael whispered. "He's killing them right now." We moved faster, no longer caring about being quiet. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches catching at our clothes, roots trying to trip us. David was in agony but didn't make a sound, biting his lip until it bled. Then we heard rustling all around us. Shadowy figures appeared between the trees, surrounding us. I counted at least 6, maybe more. Unlike earlier, they weren't keeping their distance. They were closing in. Jackson raised his hands. "We don't mean any harm," he called out softly. "We're trying to get away from that man at the cabin, the one who's hunting you." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one figure stepped forward, a woman, her clothes tattered, her hair wild and matted. In the dim moonlight, I could see scars on her face and arms. She held something that looked like a sharpened stick. "His friends," she said, her voice raspy like she rarely used it. "Come to hunt too." "No," I said desperately. "We're not with him. We just got lost and he offered us shelter. We had no idea what he was doing until tonight." "He kills us," another voice said from the darkness. Many seasons now, takes parts. I felt like I might throw up. We're trying to get away from him too. Please, my friend is injured. We just want to get back to our truck and leave these mountains. The woman studied us for what felt like forever. Then she made a gesture, and two men emerged from the shadows. Without a word, they took David from us, supporting him better than we had been able to. We show way, the woman said. Then you go. Never return. We followed them through the forest, moving almost silently. These people knew every inch of these woods, every path and stream. They led us for hours, occasionally freezing when they heard something, communicating with each other through hand signals and soft whistles. As dawn broke, we reached a ridge overlooking a valley. One of the men pointed to a dirt road visible in the distance. Road there, 2 miles, your car way. Thank you, Jackson said. Will you be okay? That man Earl, we can report him when we get back. Get help for your people. The woman, who'd first spoken to us, made a bitter sound that might have been a laugh. Police know, do nothing, say we not exist. What do you mean they know? Michael asked. Many tell, many years. They come, talk to him, leave, nothing change. He still hunt. David, who'd been mostly silent through our journey, spoke up. How many of your people has he killed? The woman held up both hands, fingers spread, then did it again. More than this, children too. We stood there in stunned silence. Earl had murdered at least 20 people, and somehow the authorities knew but had done nothing. We'll make them listen, I promised, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure how. The woman just stared at me with eyes that had seen too much suffering. Then she and the others melted back into the forest, leaving us to make our way down to the road. We eventually found our way back to the truck and drove straight to the nearest sheriff's office. We told them everything, about Earl, the explosions, the screams, the people in the woods. The deputies took our statements, but I noticed the looks they exchanged with each other. They didn't seem surprised. We'll look into it, was all they said. That was 3 years ago. I've called that sheriff's office dozens of times since then. Every time they assure me they've investigated, but found nothing conclusive. No bodies, no evidence of any mountain community, no proof of Earl's crimes. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Those people are real, and they're still being hunted. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, try to find them, try to help somehow. But I'm afraid. Not just of Earl, but of whatever system is protecting him, allowing him to keep killing while they look the other way. I still hear that woman's scream in my nightmares. I still see those eyes watching us from the trees. And I know that somewhere in those mountains, people are dying, and nobody is doing anything to stop it. Story 6. I've never told anyone about this, not even my therapist. I'm only writing it down now because I saw the fog rolling in tonight, and I think it might happen again. I need someone to know in case I disappear like the others. It was last October, just about a year ago. I live alone in my grandmother's old farmhouse on the outskirts of Blackwood, a tiny speck of a town that barely shows up on maps. The house sits on 3 acres at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by empty fields and pine forest. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away. I'd been living there for about 6 months after my divorce. The isolation was exactly what I needed. Just me and Max, my 13-year-old German Shepherd mix. He's arthritic and mostly deaf now, but still protective. That night, I remember thinking how peaceful everything was. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, scrolling through social media while Max dozed by the back door. The fog had been rolling in steadily since sunset. This wasn't unusual for our area in fall, but something about this fog felt different. It was thicker, almost yellowish, and seemed to move in unnatural ways, pressing against the windows like it was trying to get in. I remember thinking it looked almost solid, like I could reach out and grab a handful of it. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Kayla, who lives in town. Did you hear what happened to Ellen Marsh? I hadn't. Ellen was a woman in her 50s who lived alone on the other side of town. I didn't know her well, just enough to nod hello at the grocery store. Kayla's next text made my blood run cold. Found dead in her house this morning. Doors locked from inside. No forced entry. Police are baffled. I texted back asking what happened, and Kayla said they weren't sure yet. Natural causes maybe, but something felt off about the whole thing. Ellen's face had been frozen in an expression of absolute terror, and there were strange markings on her window glass, like someone had been tapping to get in. As I was reading this, the kitchen suddenly felt colder. Max, who had been sleeping soundly, jerked his head up and stared at the front door. His ears perked forward, which was unusual given his hearing loss, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping at my front door. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. It was nearly 11 at night, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Nobody just drops by when you live this far out of town. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just more tapping, slightly louder now. Max was on his feet, hackles raised, still growling at the door. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and slowly approached the entryway. Through the small window beside the door, I could see nothing but swirling fog pressed against the glass. "Who's there?" I called again, louder this time. The tapping stopped. I waited, heart pounding, before curiosity overcame fear. I turned on the porch light and cracked the door open just enough to peek out, keeping the chain lock engaged. What I saw still haunts me. Standing on my porch was a tall, impossibly thin figure in a wide-brimmed hat. The fog swirled around it, making its outlines blur and shift. I couldn't see a face, just darkness where features should be. The figure stood completely still, like it wasn't even breathing. "Can I help you?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The figure tilted its head at an unnatural angle. When it spoke, the voice didn't seem to come from where its mouth should be. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, whispering and echoing. "I'm looking for someone," it said, the words somehow both quiet and piercing. "Someone who looks like you." Ice shot down my spine. Max was going crazy behind me, barking and snarling like I'd never heard before. He tried to push past me toward the door, but I held him back. "There's nobody here but me," I managed to say. "You need to leave now." The figure remained motionless. "Are you sure?" it asked. "She looks so much like you." "I was told she'd be here." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the door. "I'm alone. Please go away or I'm calling the police." The figure leaned forward slightly, and I caught a whiff of something rotten, like wet earth and decay. "You'll see her soon," it whispered. "When the fog lifts." I slammed the door shut and locked it, then backed away until I hit the wall. Max was still barking frantically, jumping at the door. Through the side window, I could see the figure still standing there, unmoving. Then it slowly turned and walked into the fog, seeming to dissolve into the mist. With trembling fingers, I texted Kayla. "Someone just came to my door. Tall person in a hat. Couldn't see their face. Said really weird things. I'm freaking out." Her response came quickly. "Lock your doors. Don't let anyone in. People in town have been seeing someone like that in the fog. There are rumors." "What rumors?" I texted back. Her reply made my stomach drop. "That whoever sees this person is next." I called her immediately. "What do you mean, next?" I demanded when she answered. "Ellen saw someone at her window the night before she died," Kayla said, her voice tight with worry. "And there was another death last week in Henderson, the next town over. Same thing. Person saw a stranger in the fog. Next day they were found dead in a locked house." "That's just coincidence," I said, trying to convince myself more than her. "And rumors spread fast in small towns." "Maybe." Kayla didn't sound convinced. "But be careful, okay? Want me to come over?" I looked out the window at the fog, now so thick I couldn't even see my own porch. "No, the roads are too dangerous in this fog. I'll be fine. I've got Max and all the doors and windows are locked. After hanging up, I double-checked every lock in the house. I drew all the curtains and blinds, turned on every light, and grabbed the baseball bat I keep under my bed. Max wouldn't leave my side, staying pressed against my leg and growling occasionally at nothing I could see. I tried to distract myself with TV, but couldn't focus. Every few minutes, I'd get up and peer through the curtains, but all I could see was that unnaturally thick fog pressing against the glass. I kept thinking about what the figure had said, about looking for someone who looked like me, about seeing her when the fog lifted. Around 1 in the morning, I must have dozed off on the couch. I woke suddenly to Max's growling. He was standing rigid, staring at the living room window, every muscle tense. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from the window this time, slow, deliberate taps, like fingernails against glass. I stayed frozen on the couch, barely breathing. The tapping continued, moving from one window to the next, circling the house. Tap, tap, tap at the living room, then the dining room, then the kitchen. I grabbed my phone to call Kayla, but there was no signal. The fog must have been interfering with the reception. The tapping stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound from outside. Nothing. Then Max whined and backed away from the window, tail between his legs. I forced myself to look. Pressed against the glass was a hand, bone thin with impossibly long fingers, more like talons than human digits. As I watched in horror, the fog seemed to thin just enough for me to see more of the figure standing outside. It was the same tall shape in the wide-brimmed hat, but now I could make out more details. Its body was unnaturally thin and jointed wrong, like a praying mantis trying to mimic human form. And its face, God, its face. Where there should have been features, there were just hollow sockets, dark and endless. It had no eyes, but somehow I knew it was looking directly at me. Its mouth opened, a black hole in what passed for a face, and although the window was closed, I heard its whisper clearly, as if it was speaking directly into my ear. She's here. At that exact moment, every light in my house went out. Complete darkness engulfed me. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead. The battery had been at 80% just minutes before. In the pitch black, I heard the tapping resume, louder now, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. It was at every window, every door, all at once. Impossible for a single person. Max was barking frantically, spinning in circles, unable to decide which direction to face. I dropped to the floor and crawled to him, wrapping my arms around his neck as much to comfort myself as him. The tapping grew louder, faster, until it was a constant drumming sound all around the house. Then, through the noise, I heard something else. A sound that made my blood freeze. Footsteps on my porch, the creak of floorboards, the sound of my front door handle turning slowly. The door was locked. I knew it was locked. I had checked it 3 times, but I heard it open. Cold air rushed in, bringing with it tendrils of fog that slithered across my living room floor like searching fingers. Max's barking turned to whimpering, and he pressed himself against me, trembling violently. Through the darkness and swirling fog, I saw the tall figure step into my house. It moved wrong, jerky and fluid at the same time, like watching a spider crawl in stop motion. It stood in my entryway, still and silent, that featureless face turned toward me. Then it spoke again, in that terrible multi-layered whisper. She's waiting for you, the one who looks like you. The fog thickened around the figure, and for a split second, just a heartbeat, I thought I saw another shape forming in the mist beside it. A woman's shape, with my face, but wrong. Eyes too wide, mouth stretched in a silent scream. I must have blacked out then. The next thing I remember is waking up on my living room floor as sunlight streamed through the windows. The fog was gone. My front door was closed and locked, exactly as I had left it the night before. Max was curled up beside me, fast asleep. I checked my phone. It was working perfectly, battery at 78%. There were 3 missed calls from Kayla. When I called her back, she was frantic. Another person had died in the night, a man who lived alone on the edge of town. Doors locked from inside, no signs of forced entry, face frozen in terror. I never told Kayla what happened that night. I convinced myself it was a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and suggestion after hearing about Ellen's death. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and every time the fog rolls in thick like it is tonight, I remember the figure's words. You'll see her soon, when the fog lifts. The fog is pressing against my windows again now, and there's something moving out there in the mist. Max sees it too. He's growling at the front door, and I swear I just heard tapping. Story 7. I still can't sleep properly after what happened last week. Every time I close my eyes, I see that hunched figure rising from my bed, and I hear that tapping sound that wouldn't stop. I've been driving long-haul routes for 8 years now, stayed in countless motels across the country, but nothing prepared me for what I experienced at the last stop motel. It was around 11:30 at night, and I had been on the road for nearly 15 hours. I was making my way through rural Montana, trying to push through to the next major town before stopping for the night. The rain had started as a drizzle around sunset, but had transformed into a torrential downpour. My windshield wipers were going full blast, but barely making a difference. The darkness was absolute, except for my headlights cutting through the rain and occasional lightning illuminating the empty landscape around me. My eyelids were getting heavy. I kept blasting the AC and slapping my face to stay awake, but I knew I couldn't keep driving much longer. The GPS showed the nearest town was still about 70 miles away, and in this weather, that meant at least another hour of dangerous driving. I was seriously considering pulling over to nap in my car when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out a blinking neon sign that read "The Last Stop Motel" with a flickering vacancy underneath it. I hadn't seen anything indicating a motel on my GPS, but I was too tired to question this stroke of luck. The sign looked old and partially burnt out, blinking irregularly through the curtain of rain. I slowed down and turned onto a narrow gravel road that led to the building. The crunching of gravel under my tires was partially drowned out by the hammering rain on my car roof. The motel itself was a single-story L-shaped building, the kind you'd see in old movies, maybe 15 or 20 rooms with doors facing the parking lot. The paint was peeling, and some of the exterior lights were out, creating patches of complete darkness between dim pools of yellowish light. I parked near what looked like the office, grabbing my overnight bag and making a dash through the rain. By the time I reached the door, I was soaked. A bell jingled weakly as I pushed the door open. The office smelled like musty carpet and stale cigarettes. It was small, with wood-paneled walls covered in faded local maps and outdated regulations. An old TV mounted in the corner was playing static. The only light came from a dim lamp on the reception desk. Nobody was there when I entered, but before I could call out, a door behind the desk opened. The man who emerged was tall and wiry, with a deeply lined face that made it impossible to guess his age. He could have been 50 or 70. He wore a plaid shirt that hung loosely on his frame. What struck me most were his eyes, pale blue and somehow both vacant and intensely focused at the same time. "Need a room," I said, shivering slightly from my wet clothes. The man just stared at me for a moment before nodding slowly. He didn't ask for my name, ID, credit card, or any of the standard check-in stuff. He simply reached behind him and grabbed a key attached to a plastic tag with the number 13 written on it in faded marker. "Room 13, he said, his voice surprisingly deep and gravelly. "End of the row." He slid the key across the counter. I reached for my wallet. "How much for the night?" "We'll settle up in the morning," he replied, still watching me with those unsettling eyes. Something about this interaction felt off, but I was too exhausted to care. I grabbed the key and nodded my thanks. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "The walls are thin," he said. "Don't mind the noises." I paused, hand on the doorknob. What noises? But he had already disappeared through the back door. Back outside in the rain, I jogged down the covered walkway past a series of identical doors. The neon sign cast an eerie red glow over everything, pulsing irregularly with each flicker. Room 13 was at the very end of the row, the furthest from the office. Perfect. The key stuck in the lock at first, and I had to jiggle it before the door finally swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. I fumbled for a light switch and found one just inside the door. A single ceiling fixture illuminated the room with harsh fluorescent light that somehow made everything look worse. The room was basic. A queen-sized bed with a faded floral bedspread, a nightstand with a lamp, a small desk with a chair, and a TV that looked like it was from the 90s. The bathroom door was ajar, showing grimy tiles, and a shower with a plastic curtain. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and there were water stains on the ceiling. The carpet felt slightly damp under my feet. I locked the door behind me, sliding the chain lock into place for good measure. I checked the bathroom. The fixtures were old but seemed functional. The water ran rust-colored for a few seconds before clearing. The mirror above the sink was spotted with age. After a quick shower that never quite got hot enough, I changed into a t-shirt and boxers for sleep. The bed creaked loudly as I sat on it. The mattress was lumpy, and the sheets smelled like they'd been washed with cheap detergent too long ago. I tried the TV, but only got static on every channel. My phone showed no service, not unusual in remote areas. I sent a quick text to my girlfriend telling her I'd stopped for the night, hoping it would go through when I hit a signal area. As I lay there trying to get comfortable, I became aware of a strange heaviness in the air. The room felt oppressive somehow, like the air was thicker than it should be. The rain continued to pound on the roof, and the occasional rumble of thunder shook the building slightly. I told myself it was just an old motel creaking in the storm. Despite my unease, exhaustion won out. I was drifting off when I first heard it, a light tapping sound. At first I thought it was just rain hitting the window in a particular pattern, but as I became more alert, I realized it was too regular, too deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from the door. I sat up listening. The tapping continued, soft but insistent. "Hello?" I called out. No response, just the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I got up and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, I could only see the dimly lit walkway outside. No one was there, but the tapping continued, and then I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. The sound wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from inside the room. I spun around, heart pounding. The room appeared empty, just as I'd left it, but the tapping continued, and now I could pinpoint it. It was coming from the nightstand drawer. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I stood frozen, staring at the drawer. The rational part of my brain suggested a mouse or some other small animal might have gotten trapped inside. But another part of me, a more primal part, was screaming that something was very wrong. The tapping continued, growing slightly louder. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, I approached the nightstand. The tapping stopped as soon as I touched the drawer handle. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. With a deep breath, I pulled the drawer open. It was empty. No mouse, no insect, nothing that could have made that sound. Just an empty drawer with a faded Bible inside. I let out a nervous laugh, telling myself I must have imagined it or misheard the sound. That's when I felt it, a shift in the air behind me, like someone exhaling against my neck. I froze, the hair on my arms standing up. Slowly, I turned around. There was something, sitting on the edge of my bed. A hunched figure, its form indistinct in the dim light. It hadn't been there seconds ago. The door was still locked from the inside. The windows were sealed shut. There was no way anyone could have entered. Yet there it was, a dark silhouette perched on my bed, head bowed low, shoulders hunched at an impossible angle. It was perfectly still, not even appearing to breathe. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My throat had closed up completely. All I could do was stare as the figure slowly, agonizingly began to raise its head. In that moment, survival instinct kicked in. I didn't wait to see its face. I lunged for the door, fumbling with the chain lock and deadbolt with shaking hands. Behind me, I heard movement, the creak of the bed as weight shifted, the soft sound of feet hitting the carpet. I finally got the door open and burst outside into the pouring rain, not even caring that I was only in my t-shirt and boxers. I ran to my car, the gravel cutting into my bare feet. I kept expecting to feel hands grabbing me from behind, but I made it to the car, jumped in and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning on the wet gravel. As I turned the car around, my headlights swept across the motel, and for a brief moment, I saw a figure standing in the doorway of room 13, its proportions all wrong, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I floored it, speeding back to the main highway. I drove for nearly an hour in the pouring rain, my heart racing the entire time, before I found another motel, a well-lit chain hotel just off the interstate. I checked in properly this time with credit card and ID and spent the rest of the night huddled under the covers, jumping at every sound. Morning came with clear skies and sunshine that made the previous night feel like a bad dream. But I knew it wasn't. My feet were still cut from running on gravel, and my overnight bag was still at that motel. After checking out, I decided to go back. In daylight, with people around, I'd get my bag and report what happened, though I wasn't sure what exactly I would say. But when I returned to where the motel should have been, there was nothing there. I drove up and down that stretch of highway 3 times, but there was no gravel road, no faded building, no blinking neon sign. Where I thought the motel had stood was just an overgrown, abandoned lot with the crumbling foundation of what might have been a building many years ago. I even stopped at a local gas station and asked about the Last Stop Motel. The attendant, an older man who'd lived in the area his whole life, shook his head. "Used to be a motel out that way maybe 30 years ago," he said. "Burned down after a lightning strike. Owner went missing, presumed dead in the fire. Nothing's been built there since." I drove away, telling myself I must have been so tired that I'd hallucinated the whole thing, or maybe I'd sleepwalked and dreamed it all. But as I checked my rearview mirror one last time, I swear I saw a faint glow in the distance and the briefest flicker of a neon vacancy sign that disappeared when I blinked. I don't drive that route anymore, and I've started sleeping with the lights on. Story 8. I still get chills thinking about that night from 3 months ago. I've tried talking to a therapist about it, but they just think I had some kind of shared hallucination with my boyfriend Ben. I know what we saw was real. I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar, or can at least tell me I'm not crazy. It was supposed to be a simple 5-hour drive to visit Ben's parents for Thanksgiving. We left late, around 6 in the evening, because Ben had to finish up some work stuff. I didn't mind. I had my playlist ready and snacks packed. The first couple hours were fine, just your usual highway driving. Then we hit that detour. Some accident had closed the main road, and we were diverted onto these backcountry roads that weren't even on our GPS. No big deal, we thought. The detour signs were clear enough at first, but then the fog rolled in. Not your normal fog, but this thick, soupy stuff that seemed to swallow our headlights. It was like driving through a wall of white, visibility maybe 5 feet ahead of us at best. Ben slowed down to like 20 miles per hour, and we were still barely able to see the road. "Try checking where we are," Ben said, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. I pulled out my phone. No signal, not even one bar. "Nothing," I told him. "But I think if we keep following this road, we'll hit the highway eventually." The road kept winding and twisting. The trees on either side looked weird in the fog, all twisted and gnarled, and there were these rock formations that would suddenly appear out of nowhere in our headlights, jagged things that looked like they were watching us. Sounds stupid, I know, but that's exactly what it felt like. After another hour of this, I was getting seriously worried. My phone's battery was at 15% and we still had no idea where we were. The only sign we'd passed said Amber Ridge, 3 miles, but neither of us had ever heard of it. "Ben, maybe we should pull over," I suggested. It's getting dangerous, and we're probably just getting more lost. He nodded, looking exhausted. Yeah, you're right. First safe spot I see, we'll stop. About 10 minutes later, we spotted what looked like a driveway. Ben carefully turned in, and our headlights revealed this large two-story house set back from the road. It looked abandoned, paint peeling, some windows boarded up, overgrown yard. An old sign hanging from one post read, "Amber Ridge Inn." "Guess this place has been closed for years," Ben said, parking near the front of the building, but not too close. "At least we're off the road. We can sleep in the car and figure things out in the morning when this fog hopefully lifts." We reclined our seats as far as they would go, which wasn't very comfortable, but it was better than driving in that fog. Ben had some granola bars in his backpack, so we ate those and tried to settle in. The car was getting cold with the engine off, so we kept our jackets on and shared the emergency blanket I keep in the trunk. That's when I started feeling it, this weird sensation of being watched. I tried to brush it off. Old houses look creepy at night, especially in fog. That's all it was. "You feel that?" Ben whispered after we'd been quiet for a while. My stomach dropped. "Feel what?" "Like something's watching us." So it wasn't just me. I looked at the house, and I swear I saw movement behind one of the upstairs windows. Just a quick shadow, there and gone. "It's just our eyes playing tricks," I said, not believing it myself. "Old houses settle, probably just a raccoon or something inside." We tried to sleep, but I kept jerking awake, thinking I heard something. Around 2 in the morning, I was staring at the ceiling of the car when I heard it. A light, rhythmic tapping on the passenger window by my head. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. It was too regular to be a branch or something natural. I slowly turned my head toward the window, but the fog pressed against the glass, and I couldn't see anything. "Ben," I whispered, grabbing his arm. "Ben, wake up." He stirred. What's wrong?" "There's something outside the car." The tapping stopped as soon as I said it. Ben sat up, suddenly alert. "What did you hear?" "Tapping on my window, like someone using their fingernail." We both went silent, listening. Nothing for a minute. Then it started again, but on his side this time. Tap, tap, tap. Then came the scraping, like nails dragging slowly across the glass. It made my skin crawl. "Fuck this," Ben said, reaching for the ignition. "We're getting out of here." He turned the key, and the engine didn't respond. Not even a click. He tried again. Nothing. "No, no, no," he muttered, trying over and over. "This can't be happening. The car was fine earlier." The scraping sound moved to the back window now, then to mine again, circling the car. I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. "Look," Ben pointed through the windshield. Through the fog, maybe 20 feet away, I could make out a figure moving between the trees near the house. Tall and thin, it seemed to glide rather than walk. It disappeared behind a tree, then reappeared closer. "We can't stay in the car," Ben said. "We're sitting ducks." "The house? Are you serious?" I couldn't believe he was suggesting we go into the creepy, abandoned building. "At least we can barricade ourselves in a room. Out here, we're trapped." As much as I hated the idea, he was right. The tapping had become more insistent, and I could feel the car rocking slightly, as if something was pushing against it. "On 3, we run for the front door," Ben said, gripping the door handle. 1, 2, 3. We burst out of the car and sprinted toward the house. The fog swirled around us, thick and disorienting. I swear I heard something moving behind us, but I didn't look back. We reached the front door. It was locked, of course. Ben threw his shoulder against it once, twice, and on the third try the old wood splintered around the lock. We stumbled inside and slammed the door shut behind us. The interior of the inn was freezing cold and smelled of mildew and rot. Our flashlights from our phones revealed a dusty lobby with an old reception desk, scattered furniture, and stairs leading to the second floor. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except And this is what made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the dust, fresh ones, not ours. They led from the front door, across the lobby, and up the stairs. "Someone's been here," I whispered. "Or something," Ben replied. "Let's find a room we can secure." We moved through the lobby, trying to be quiet. Every floorboard seemed to creak under our weight. The place must have been abandoned for decades. Old paintings hung crooked on the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow us. I know that sounds like something from a movie, but that's exactly how it felt. We found a door that led to what must have been a dining room. Tables were still set with moldy tablecloths and rusted silverware, like everyone had just gotten up and left in the middle of a meal. "This is so wrong," I whispered. "We shouldn't be here." That's when we heard it. Footsteps above us, slow and deliberate, someone walking around on the second floor. Ben grabbed my hand. "We need to hide." But where? The dining room had no places to conceal ourselves. The kitchen beyond it was too exposed. The footsteps were moving toward the stairs now. "The second floor," Ben said suddenly. "If whatever it is coming down, we should go up." It was insane, but we didn't have many options. We crept back to the lobby and waited until we heard the footsteps reach the middle of the staircase. Then we darted across to another door that led to a narrow hallway. At the end of the hall was another staircase, smaller than the main one. Service stairs, probably. We climbed them as quietly as possible, emerging into a corridor lined with doors. Guest rooms. We tried the first door. Locked. The second one opened, revealing a small room with a bed frame, a dresser with a broken mirror, and a bathroom. It would have to do. We slipped inside and closed the door, dragging the dresser in front of it. The room was freezing, and our breath came out in visible puffs. Ben's phone was at 7% battery, mine at 10. We couldn't afford to keep the flashlights on, so we turned them off and stood in the darkness, listening. For a while, there was nothing. Then came the sound of something climbing the service stairs we'd just used. Slow, heavy footsteps. "It's following us," I whispered. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused. Then they started moving down the hall, stopping at each door briefly before continuing. Getting closer to our room. I was shaking uncontrollably now. Ben put his arm around me, but I could feel him trembling too. The footsteps stopped outside our door. The doorknob rattled. Then came a voice, if you could call it that. It was like several voices layered on top of each other, speaking in unison. "We know you're in there." I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. Ben's grip on me tightened. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice continued. "This is our place." Something scratched at the door, like nails or claws. The dresser we'd pushed against it began to slide slightly. "The window," Ben mouthed, pointing. We moved to the window, which overlooked the back of the property. It was still foggy outside, but I could make out the ground, about 15 feet below, too far to jump safely. As Ben tried to figure out if there was a way to climb down, I heard it, the tapping again, on the window glass. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up and saw it, a face in the window, not pressed against it from outside, but somehow in the glass itself, like it was part of the reflection that shouldn't exist. A gaunt face with hollow black eyes and a smile that stretched too wide. I screamed then. I couldn't help it. Ben spun around and saw it too. The face in the glass began to push through, the surface of the window bulging inward like it was made of some elastic material. At the same time, the dresser blocking the door slid further aside as something pushed against it from the hall. We were trapped. The face was halfway through the window now, that impossible smile growing wider. The dresser moved another inch. Ben grabbed my hand. "The bathroom, now." We ran into the small bathroom and locked the flimsy door behind us. There was a tiny window above the toilet, barely big enough for me to fit through. "I'll boost you up," Ben said. "You go first." "No way," I argued. "We both go or neither of us goes." "Jess, please." The bathroom door splintered inward. Through the crack, I saw a tall, gaunt figure step into the bedroom. It seemed to shimmer, like it wasn't fully solid. Its movements were wrong, too fluid, too deliberate. It turned its head toward the bathroom door, that horrible smile still fixed on its face. At the same moment, the small bathroom window shattered inward and long, pale fingers reached through. I don't remember much after that. Somehow we got out of that room, past that thing. I have flashes of running down the hallway, of more of those figures emerging from the walls and floor, of reaching the main staircase and practically falling down it in our rush to escape. The front door was wide open when we reached it, the fog billowing in. Our car was still there, and when Ben tried the ignition, it started, immediately. We sped away from that place, tires spinning on the gravel. Neither of us spoke until we were miles away and the fog had begun to thin. When dawn broke, we found ourselves on a main highway. A road sign indicated we were about 40 miles from our original route. We stopped at the first diner we saw and used their Wi-Fi to look up Amber Ridge Inn. According to local history, the inn burned down in 1972, killing everyone inside. The property has been empty ever since, but we were there. We were inside it. I still have a scar on my arm from where I cut myself on broken glass during our escape. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Ben and I hardly talk about it now, but sometimes when it's quiet at night, I still hear that tapping on my window. Tap, tap, tap. And I know they followed us home. Story 9. I'm an experienced solo hiker, been doing weekend trips for about 7 years now, and I usually stick to marked trails. But last July, I decided to try this remote section of state forest that a buddy from work had mentioned. He'd said it was super quiet, no tourists, just pure wilderness, the kind of place where you could actually be alone with your thoughts. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, water filter, some freeze-dried meals, basic survival gear, nothing fancy. The plan was simple. 2 nights, just me in the woods. I'd been feeling burned out at work, and something about disconnecting completely seemed exactly what I needed. The trailhead was this tiny gravel pull-off that you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. There wasn't even a proper sign, just a wooden post with a faded red blaze. I remember checking my GPS coordinates twice to make sure I was in the right spot before heading in. The trail itself was barely maintained, overgrown in spots with these ancient red markers painted on trees that had started to peel and fade. I hiked for about 4 hours that first day. The forest got denser the farther I went, tall pines blocking out most of the sunlight. By late afternoon, I found a decent spot near a small stream, flat enough for my tent, water source nearby. Perfect. Setting up camp felt good. That familiar routine of staking down the tent, gathering some kindling, filtering water. I ate one of my freeze-dried meals as the sun went down and listened to the forest sounds. That first night was peaceful. I remember waking up a few times to rustling noises, probably deer or raccoons, but nothing concerning. Just the usual forest nightlife. The next morning, I woke up to gray skies and that heavy feeling in the air that means rain is coming. I checked the weather on my satellite device, and sure enough, a storm system was moving in faster than predicted. I decided to cut my trip short rather than risk getting soaked and miserable. There was supposed to be a loop trail that would take me back to my car in about 5 hours, so I packed up and headed out. This is where things started to get weird. About 2 hours into my hike, the trail markers became harder to spot. Some were missing entirely. Others had faded to the point where they blended with the bark. I kept pushing forward, thinking I'd pick up the trail again, but soon found myself in this dense section of underbrush with no visible path. I'm not the type to panic. I pulled out my compass, figured I needed to head southwest to eventually hit the main trail again, and started bushwhacking in that direction. The forest had gotten unnaturally quiet. No bird calls, no wind through the trees, just the sound of my boots crunching leaves and twigs. That's when I stumbled across it. At first I thought it was just a small clearing, but as I got closer, I realized it was an abandoned campsite. And I mean properly abandoned, not just someone who'd packed up and left recently. There was no tent, just a ring of stones forming a fire pit with years of rain and decay washing through it. A few items were scattered around: a rusted camping stove that looked like it was from the 80s or 90s, a blue enamel mug with chips along the rim, and a tin can. I don't know why, but that can drew my attention immediately. It was just sitting there, partially buried in leaves but still upright, like someone had placed it deliberately. An old-style can of beans, the kind with the pull tab on top, not the modern pop-top ones. It was dented and covered in dirt and rust, but surprisingly intact. When I picked it up, I noticed something scratched into the metal on the side. These are the beans of a killer. My first thought was that it was some weird joke. Maybe some hikers with a dark sense of humor had left it behind. I turned the can over in my hands and found the expiration date stamped on the bottom, July 1997. This site hadn't been abandoned recently. It had been there for decades, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The fire pit was filled with rotted leaves, moss growing on the rocks. The stove was so rusted that parts of it had disintegrated completely. Standing there, I suddenly became aware of how quiet it was. You know that feeling when you're in a room and can sense someone watching you? It was like that, but amplified by the vastness of the forest. I felt like the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I should have dropped the can and kept moving. That would have been the normal reaction. Instead, for reasons I still can't explain, I put it in my pack. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe I thought no one would believe me without proof. Whatever the reason, I zipped that creepy can into the side pocket of my backpack and got the hell out of there. It took me another 3 hours of careful navigation with my compass before I finally found the trail again. The whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, listening for footsteps that weren't my own. Nothing ever appeared, but the sensation of being watched was so intense that by the time I reached my car, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air. The rain started as I pulled onto the main road. First, just a few drops, then a complete downpour. I was relieved to be in my car, headed back to civilization, but the can in my pack felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. That night in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. The phrase kept repeating in my head, "These are the beans of a killer." Who would write something like that? And why leave it in the middle of nowhere? Around 2 in the morning, I grabbed my laptop and started searching. First, I looked up missing persons cases in that region of the state forest. There were several over the years, but one caught my attention: a backpacker who disappeared in 1998. His car had been found at a trailhead about 5 miles from where I'd parked. They never found him, just his abandoned vehicle sitting on that same gravel road I'd used. I dug deeper, found some old forum posts from the early 2000s. A hiker claimed they'd photographed a weird rusted bean can at an abandoned campsite in those same woods. The photo was long gone, the link dead, but the description matched what I'd found. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A newspaper article from 2006 about a hiker found dead in that forest, blunt force trauma to the head. The article mentioned that investigators found the victim's camp had been disturbed, gear stolen, but they also found an unopened can of beans with its label scratched off, placed upright in the fire pit. It was mentioned as an odd detail, nothing more. I stared at the can sitting on my kitchen counter. The crude lettering seemed to stand out more under my apartment lights. I could see how carefully each letter had been carved, not in haste, but deliberately, meant to endure years of exposure to the elements. Should I have gone to the police? Probably. But what would I say? I found an old can of beans in the woods with a creepy message? I had no real evidence connecting it to anything, just my paranoid late-night research and a feeling I couldn't shake. The next day, I drove to the edge of town, hiked about half a mile into a wooded area, and buried that can a foot deep. I don't know why I felt the need to bury it rather than just throw it away. Something about it demanded more respect than just tossing it in the trash. I've gone hiking plenty of times since then, but I've never returned to that section of forest. Sometimes I think I overreacted to a strange but ultimately meaningless discovery. Other times, usually when I'm trying to fall asleep, I remember the unnatural stillness of that forgotten campsite, the weight of that can in my hand, and the feeling of being watched as I made my way back to safety. I still wonder about those words. Were they a confession, a warning, a sick joke? And if there really was a killer out there, using those beans as some kind of calling card, are they still watching those trails, waiting for hikers who wander off the path? I know this sounds crazy. Maybe it was nothing, but I can't forget the careful carving of those words or how perfectly preserved that can was, despite years in the elements. Almost like someone had been maintaining that site, returning to it, keeping their message intact for others to find. I keep checking local news from that area, half expecting to see another hiker gone missing or worse. So far, nothing. But sometimes I wonder if I should have left that can where I found it, or if by taking it, I somehow became part of whatever twisted story it belongs to. Story 10. I've been hesitating to write this down for years. Every time I think about that night in March of 2005, my hands start to shake. I'm a trucker, 23 years on the road now. Back then, I'd been driving for about 7 years, not as long as some of the old-timers, but long enough to know the rhythms of the road, the unwritten rules of truck stops, and to develop that sixth sense most of us get after a few years behind the wheel. That night changed everything for me. I still drive, but I've never been the same since. It was Friday, March 11th, 2005. I remember because I'd been listening to the radio all day about the Madrid bombing anniversary coming up. I was hauling electronics from Richmond to Cleveland. Nothing exciting, just another run. I'd been on the road about 12 hours and was getting to that point where my eyes were feeling heavy and the white lines on the highway were starting to dance a little. I needed to stop. My logbook said I needed to stop. So when I saw the sign for the Blue Mountain Truck Plaza off Route 219 in Pennsylvania, I figured that was as good a place as any. I'd stopped there maybe twice before. Nothing special about it, just your typical truck stop with a decent diner, showers that weren't completely disgusting, and a large enough lot that you could usually find a quiet corner to park for the night. I pulled in around 8:30 that evening. The lot was about half full. Friday night, so a lot of guys were trying to get home instead of stopping. I found a spot near the back of the lot, away from most of the other trucks and the constant door slamming and engine noise that comes with parking closer to the building. After I shut down the engine, I sat there for a minute, just stretching my back and rolling my neck. 12 hours in the seat makes everything stiff. I grabbed my wallet and phone, locked up, and headed to the diner. I remember thinking it was colder than I expected. The kind of damp cold that gets right into your bones. The diner was nothing special, the same vinyl booths and laminate tables you see at every truck stop across the country. I ordered meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The waitress called me honey and kept my coffee cup filled. Normal stuff. While I was eating, I noticed a guy sitting at the counter. Nothing remarkable about him really. Average height, maybe late 40s, wearing a dark jacket. The thing that caught my attention was how he kept looking around, watching everyone. In our line of work, you develop a sense for people watching you. It's like a prickle on the back of your neck. I've had that feeling at sketchy stops in bad neighborhoods, but never at a place like Blue Mountain. I remember thinking he might be a new driver, nervous about leaving his rig, or maybe just one of those naturally fidgety people. I didn't give it much more thought at the time. God, I wish I had. After dinner, I got a coffee to go and asked the waitress to put the rest of my meatloaf in a container. I wasn't hungry enough to finish it, but I hate wasting food. I figured I'd eat it for breakfast before hitting the road again. I used the restroom, then headed back to my truck around 9:40. The lot was darker than I remembered. A couple of the lights were out in the section where I'd parked. I remember thinking I should have parked under a working light, but I was too tired to move the rig now. As I walked across the lot, I had that feeling again, the one where you know you're being watched. I looked around but didn't see anyone except a couple of drivers standing by their trucks smoking. The parking lot was arranged in rows with big rigs lined up side by side. My truck was in the last row, facing away from the building. I remember checking my phone as I walked. My wife had texted to make sure I was stopped for the night. I texted back that I was at a truck stop in Pennsylvania and would call her in the morning. That was the last text I ever sent from that phone. As I approached my truck, I noticed a dark SUV parked about 4 spots down. I didn't remember seeing it when I parked earlier, but that wasn't unusual. People come and go all night at these places. I unlocked my truck, put the coffee and leftovers on the passenger seat, and was about to climb up when I dropped my keys. I bent down to pick them up, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, purposeful steps on the asphalt. Before I could stand up or turn around, something slipped around my neck. It wasn't a rope or a wire. It was rigid, like a pole with a loop at the end. A catch pole, I later learned, the kind animal control uses. It tightened around my neck and I was yanked backward with incredible force. I dropped everything, my phone, the keys, everything, and grabbed at the thing around my neck. I couldn't get my fingers under it. It was pulled so tight I could barely breathe. I kicked and thrashed, but whoever had me was strong and knew exactly what they were doing. I felt a sharp sting in my shoulder, like a bee sting but deeper. Immediately my limbs started to feel heavy. My thoughts got fuzzy around the edges. I was being drugged. I knew it, but couldn't do anything to stop it. The last thing I remember clearly is being dragged backward across the asphalt, my heels scraping along the ground. I was trying to scream, but no sound would come out. Just as my consciousness started to fade, I saw my truck getting farther away and had this bizarre thought that I'd never delivered those electronics to Cleveland. When I woke up, I was in complete darkness. Not the kind of darkness where your eyes eventually adjust. This was absolute. I was lying on something cold and hard. Metal, I think. My hands were secured above my head, and my ankles were bound too. The zip ties were so tight my hands had gone numb. My head was pounding, and my mouth was bone dry. Whatever drug he'd used left me with the worst hangover of my life. I tried to call out, but my voice was just a raspy whisper. My throat felt raw from the catchpole. I had no idea where I was or how long I'd been unconscious. Hours? Days? The complete disorientation was terrifying. I strained to hear anything that might give me a clue about where I was. All I could hear was a faint mechanical hum, maybe a refrigerator or generator, and occasionally what sounded like wind against a metal roof. I tried to reconstruct what had happened. Someone had been watching me at the truck stop. They'd followed me to my truck, subdued me with that pole thing, drugged me and brought me here, wherever here was. The worst part was not knowing why. Was this a robbery gone wrong? Was I about to be ransomed, or was it something worse? The methodical nature of the attack made me think this wasn't random. This person had done this before. I don't know how long I lay there in the dark before I heard it. The sound of a door opening somewhere nearby, and then footsteps. Heavy boots on what sounded like concrete. Getting closer. A light suddenly blazed on, blindingly bright after the total darkness. I squinted against it, trying to see who was there. As my eyes adjusted, I made out a figure standing in a doorway. It was the same man from the diner, average height, dark jacket. But now I could see his face clearly. He was completely ordinary looking, the kind of face you'd forget immediately after seeing it, except for his eyes. They were empty, not angry, not excited, just vacant. He didn't say anything, just stood there looking at me. Then he raised something in his hand, a camera, an old Polaroid. The flash went off, temporarily blinding me again. "Number 6, he said. Just that. His voice was flat, emotionless. Then he turned and left, shutting the door and plunging me back into darkness. I lost track of time after that. He'd come in periodically, to give me water through a straw or to inject me with something that would make me pass out again. Sometimes I'd wake up in different positions or with different clothes, and the horrible realization that he'd been moving me around like a doll while I was unconscious. I tried talking to him once, asked him why he was doing this. He just looked at me with those empty eyes and said, You're not the first trucker to disappear, and you won't be the last. That's when I knew. He was hunting us, using the isolation of truck stops and the anonymous nature of the job to pick us off. No one questions when a trucker doesn't show up somewhere on time. Delays happen. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, the trail is cold. I don't know exactly how many days I was in that place, maybe 5 or 6. I tried to keep track by counting his visits, but the drugs made everything blur together. The room was small, with metal walls and no windows. Later, I'd learn it was a converted milk house on an abandoned dairy farm. One night, at least I think it was night, something changed. He came in looking agitated. He was muttering to himself. For the first time, he seemed unfocused. He injected me with something, but it didn't knock me out completely this time. I was groggy, floating in and out of consciousness, but still aware. I heard sirens in the distance, lots of them, getting closer. His movements became frantic. He was gathering things, shoving them into a bag, papers, photos, something that looked like logbooks. The next part is still fuzzy. There was shouting outside. Flashlight beams started slicing through cracks in the building I hadn't noticed before. He disappeared from the room. Then there was a crash, the sound of splintering wood, and suddenly the room was full of people in uniforms. State police, FBI jackets, flashlights blinding me. Someone was cutting the zip ties off my wrists and ankles. Someone else was talking to me, asking my name, telling me I was safe now, but I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was still dreaming, still drugged. They carried me out on a stretcher. As they loaded me into an ambulance, I caught a glimpse of the building I'd been in, a small, cinder block structure with a metal roof. There were police cars everywhere, their lights painting everything in red and blue pulses. In the hospital, they told me what happened. The guy's name was Howard Keegan, former trucker who lost his license years ago. He'd been hunting truckers for almost 2 years. They found 5 bodies buried on his property, 5 other men who weren't as lucky as me. I was only saved because another trucker had spotted something suspicious at the Blue Mountain Plaza. She'd taken a photo of someone crawling under a trailer with what looked like a catch pole. That photo made its way to the FBI, who were already investigating the disappearance of Ray Simmons, another trucker who'd vanished from the same truck stop just the day before I stopped there. They told me Keegan had crashed his SUV that night, which is how they found him. In his vehicle were zip ties, that catch pole, sedatives, and Polaroids, including one of me. It's been 17 years now. I still drive, but never alone. My wife rides with me most trips. I never stop at isolated places, never park away from other trucks. I carry a weapon now, legally with all the proper permits, and I never ever go near the Blue Mountain Truck Plaza. I heard they put up a memorial there for the victims, Ray Simmons and the others. There could have been a stone with my name on it too. Sometimes I'll be sitting in my truck waiting for a light to change, and I'll look over at the driver in the car next to me, and for just a second, I'll wonder if they're hunting too. Story 11. I've been an avid hiker for about 8 years now. I've done most of the major trails in the eastern US, and I'm usually pretty comfortable being alone in the wilderness. That changed last month. I'd been planning a 4-day solo hike in the Great Smoky Mountains for months. I'd mapped my route carefully, a 30-mile loop starting west of Klingman's Dome, following some less traveled paths. I was excited about getting away from the crowds on the main trails and experiencing some true solitude. The first day started great. Weather was perfect, mid-60s, slight breeze, not a cloud in the sky. I made good time, covering about 11 miles before I started looking for a place to camp. Around 5 in the afternoon, I found this perfect little clearing about 50 yards off the trail near a small creek. It was sheltered by a stand of old hemlocks, with a natural flat area perfect for pitching my tent. As I was setting up camp, I noticed something odd. The forest was completely silent, and I mean completely. Usually in the Smokies, especially near water, you're surrounded by sound, birds, insects, the rustling of small animals, but there was nothing except the soft gurgle of the creek. I figured maybe a predator had passed through recently and scared everything off, but something about it made me uneasy. I tried to shake it off. I set up my tent, collected some firewood and got a small fire going, made myself some freeze-dried lasagna on my camp stove, and enjoyed the sunset through the trees. The silence continued, though. No night insects started chirping, no owls, nothing. By 10 o'clock, I decided to turn in. I extinguished my fire carefully, hung my food bag from a tree branch away from camp, bears are no joke in the Smokies, and crawled into my sleeping bag. That's when things got weird. I couldn't sleep, not like normal insomnia. This was different. I felt this strange pressure in my chest, like someone was sitting on me. My heart was racing for no reason. I checked my pulse with my fitness watch, 110 beats per minute while lying still. That's not normal for me at all. I'm usually around 60. I tried reading on my Kindle for a while, thinking maybe I just needed to calm down. The pressure didn't go away. I felt like I couldn't take a full breath. The air in my tent seemed thick, almost humid, despite the cool night outside. Around midnight, I checked my watch. I heard something that made me freeze. A cough, a human cough, coming from outside, maybe 15 or 20 feet from my tent. Not an animal sound, definitely human. There was no mistaking it. My first thought was that another hiker had set up camp nearby and I hadn't noticed, but that didn't make sense. I would have seen or heard someone. And why would they be sitting outside my tent at midnight without announcing themselves? I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy-duty tactical ones that can practically blind someone, and unzipped my tent flap. The sound had come from the direction of the creek, so I pointed my light that way. That's when I saw her. There was a woman sitting at the edge of the creek, about 15 feet from my tent. She was just sitting there. Her back was partially to me, but I could see her profile. Long dark hair that looked matted and tangled. She was wearing what looked like a dress, but it was torn and dirty. Her skin was pale, really pale, almost like it was reflecting my flashlight beam more than it should. The thing that immediately struck me as wrong was how still she was, completely motionless. I don't mean like someone trying to hold still, I mean unnaturally motionless, like a photograph. And she didn't react to my light at all, which was strange because it was bright enough to make anyone flinch, or at least turn to look. "Hello?" I called out. My voice came out shakier than I expected. No response, not even a twitch. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, are you okay?" Nothing. She just sat there, staring at the water. I couldn't see her face clearly, just her profile, but something about her posture seemed off, like she wasn't sitting normally. Her back was too straight, her shoulders at an odd angle. I looked away for literally 1 second to grab my shoes from beside my tent flap, and when I looked back, she was gone. Not like she'd gotten up and walked away, she had vanished. There was no sound, no movement in the underbrush, nothing. Just empty space where she had been sitting. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. I grabbed my flashlight and, against my better judgment, got out of the tent to investigate. The ground was soft near the creek from recent rain. When I reached the spot where she'd been sitting, I found footprints. Bare human footprints pressed into the mud at the creek's edge. They were small, like a woman's, and they only went in one direction, toward the spot where she'd been sitting. There were no footprints leading away. That's when the fear really hit me. My hands started shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight steady. I swept the beam around in a full circle, lighting up every tree and bush within 20 yards. Nothing, no movement. No sound except my own breathing, which was coming in quick, shallow gasps. I went back to my tent, but there was no way I was staying there. No freaking way. I started packing up my gear as fast as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned to look, nothing was there. It took me maybe 15 minutes to break camp. Probably a record for me. I didn't bother being neat about it, just stuffed everything into my pack haphazardly. I kept my knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other the whole time. The hike back to the trailhead was the most terrifying experience of my life. It was about 5 miles back to where I'd parked my car, and I had to do it in the dark. I didn't have the trail to myself anymore. I felt like something was following me the entire way. Several times I spun around, certain I'd hear footsteps behind me, but I never saw anything. Every shadow looked like a person. Every tree trunk seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. The silence of the forest was deafening. Still, no animal sounds, no insects, nothing but my own labored breathing and footsteps. I kept thinking about those footprints that didn't lead away from the creek, about how she had disappeared in the fraction of a second I looked away, about that unnatural stillness. It took me just under 2 hours to reach my car. I've never been so happy to see that beat-up old Subaru in my life. I threw my pack in the back, got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, just breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I was about to start the car, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, and I swear this on my life, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods behind my car, a woman with long, dark hair. But when I whipped around to look out the back window, there was nothing there. I drove straight to the ranger station near the park entrance. It was closed, of course, being around 2 in the morning, but there was an emergency phone. I called and reported what I'd seen. The night ranger who took my call was polite but skeptical. He took down my information and said someone would follow up with me. 2 days later, a different ranger called me. She asked a lot of questions about exactly where I'd been camping, what I'd seen, etc. I got the impression she thought I was either making it up or had seen a real person, maybe a homeless woman or another hiker, and had panicked unnecessarily. When I mentioned the unnatural stillness and how the woman had vanished without a trace, I could practically hear her mentally filing me under nutcase. She thanked me for the report and said they'd keep an eye out during their patrols, but I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. It's been 4 weeks now, and I still can't shake what happened. I've researched local legends, missing persons reports, everything I could think of. Nothing fits exactly what I saw. I'm not a superstitious person. I've never believed in ghosts or anything like that, but I can't explain what I experienced that night. The footprints that led nowhere, the absolute silence of the forest, the way she vanished in the blink of an eye, the crushing pressure in my chest that didn't let up until I was miles away from that creek. I haven't been hiking since. The thought of being alone in the woods now fills me with dread. I keep wondering, if I had looked away longer, would she have moved closer? What would have happened if I'd approached her directly? Was she trying to warn me about something, or was she herself the danger? I don't know if I'll ever go back to the Smokies. There's something out there in those remote areas, something that doesn't want to be seen or understood, something that doesn't follow the rules of our world. And it's watching, waiting in the silence for people like me who wander too far from the beaten path. Story 12. I never thought I'd be sharing this experience online, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been 3 months since it happened, and I still wake up in cold sweats hearing that whisper. I'm still seeing a therapist twice a week, and she suggested writing about it might help process everything. So here goes. I've always been the adventure seeker among my friends. They call me thrill-seeking Riley, because I'm usually the first to jump off cliffs into water or explore abandoned buildings. I've done some urban exploring, backpacked through South America, and even spent a week living in the wilderness with just basic supplies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that night in May. It started as a dare at my friend Alex's birthday party. We were all a few beers in when someone brought up how I hadn't done anything crazy lately. Alex said, "I bet you couldn't do a solo cross-country drive without planning anything in advance." Everyone laughed, but I took it seriously. I had 3 weeks of vacation time saved up at work, and honestly, I was feeling stuck in a rut. A spontaneous road trip sounded perfect. 2 days later, I packed my Toyota Corolla with some clothes, my camera, basic camping gear, and snacks. No hotel reservations, no real itinerary, just me, the open road, and a general idea to head west from Pennsylvania toward California. The first few days were amazing. I stopped at roadside attractions, took detours to small towns not on any tourist maps, and slept at decent motels I found along the way. By day 5, I was somewhere in the Midwest, Nebraska or Kansas, I think. The landscapes had become increasingly barren, just endless fields and occasional clusters of trees. I'd been driving for almost 11 hours straight that day. My GPS had lost signal hours ago, and my phone was at 15% battery with no charger working in my car. The adapter had fried the day before. I'd been following signs for the interstate, but somehow found myself on a narrow 2-lane highway that seemed to stretch forever into nothing. As the sun started setting, I realized I needed to find somewhere to stay. The sky turned this deep purple-orange, and the shadows got longer across the road. I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour, and my gas gauge was hovering uncomfortably close to empty. My eyes burned from driving all day, and I kept catching myself nodding off for microseconds. That's when I saw it, a small, dim light in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out a faded sign. Riverside Motel, with a vacancy sign flickering weakly beneath it. There wasn't a river anywhere that I could see, just flat land stretching in all directions. The building itself was a single-story L-shaped structure, painted a color that might have once been white but had faded to a sickly yellow-gray. Some of the paint was peeling off in long strips like dead skin. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but my practical side won out. It was getting dark fast, I was exhausted, and I had no idea how far the next town might be. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the stones crunching loudly under my tires. There were no other cars there, which I found strange, but rationalized that it was the middle of nowhere on a weeknight. The office was at one end of the L shape, with a dim light visible through grimy windows. I grabbed my phone, wallet, and overnight bag and walked across the lot. Each step felt heavier than the last, like my body was physically resisting approaching this place. I remember thinking it was just fatigue. A bell jangled when I pushed open the door. The office smelled like mothballs and something else, something sour I couldn't identify. Behind a wooden counter stood an elderly man. I still can't describe him accurately because looking at him made my eyes hurt somehow. His face seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't focusing directly on it. What I do remember clearly were his eyes, deeply sunken and unnaturally dark, like looking into empty space. His skin had this waxy quality, too pale and too smooth for someone his age. "Need a room," I said, trying to sound casual despite my growing unease. He didn't respond verbally. He just stared at me for what felt like an eternity before slowly reaching under the counter and placing a key on the surface between us. The key was attached to a faded red plastic tag with the number 9 on it. I remember thinking it was odd he didn't ask for ID or payment information. "How much for the night?" I asked. His mouth moved, but the words seemed to come from somewhere else in the room. "We'll settle up in the morning." I nodded, taking the key. As my fingers touched the cold metal, a wave of dizziness hit me. For a split second, I swear the man's face changed, his mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing darkness inside. I blinked, and he was normal again, watching me with those empty eyes. The hallway to the rooms was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. The carpet beneath my feet felt damp in spots, though there were no visible stains. Room 9 was at the far end of the hallway, the last door before the building turned the corner of the L. The key stuck in the lock, requiring me to jiggle it before the door finally swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. The room itself was basic and run down, a double bed with a faded floral bedspread, a small table with a lamp, a TV that looked like it was from the 90s, and a bathroom door that was slightly ajar. The wallpaper, a pattern of muted stripes, was peeling in the corners, curling away from the wall like fingers. I did a quick check of the bathroom, a shower with rust stains, a toilet that ran continuously, and a sink with a dripping faucet. The mirror above the sink was spotted with black marks that looked like mold. I tried turning on the TV, but it only produced static. My phone showed no service and was down to 12% battery. Exhaustion hit me hard. Despite my growing discomfort with the place, I decided to just sleep and leave at first light. I didn't even bother changing clothes, just kicked off my shoes and lay down on top of the bedspread. The mattress felt lumpy and uneven, with springs digging into my back. I must have dozed off because I jolted awake to complete darkness. The lamp had gone out. Power outage or burnt bulb, I wasn't sure. What woke me was a sound, a light tapping like fingernails against wood. At first, I thought it might be tree branches against the window, but I remembered there were no trees near the building. The tapping continued, growing slightly louder and more insistent. It was coming from the door. I froze, listening intently. There was a pattern to it. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 quick taps, pause. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the darkness. The tapping stopped. Immediately. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The battery was at 5% now. The room looked different in the harsh light. Shadows deeper, walls seeming closer than before. I slowly got up and approached the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Just as I reached for the peephole, the tapping started again, louder, more forceful. The door actually vibrated with each impact. This wasn't someone politely knocking. This was something trying to get in. "Who's there?" I shouted, backing away from the door. No answer, just more tapping, now a continuous rhythm without pauses. Then the doorknob began to rattle violently, like someone was trying to force it open. I could see it turning back and forth, the cheap lock mechanism straining. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the battery died at that exact moment, plunging me back into darkness. The rattling stopped abruptly, and an unnatural silence filled the room. That silence was somehow worse than the noise, a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. Then I heard it, a whisper from the other side of the door, so close it could have been speaking directly into my ear. "Room for one more." The voice wasn't human. It had this wet, gurgling quality, like someone speaking through fluid. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the bed, unable to look away from the door. "Room for one more," the voice repeated, slightly louder this time. The doorknob began to turn again, slowly, deliberately. The lock made a distinct clicking sound as it disengaged. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Just watched as the door began to open inward, revealing nothing but absolute darkness beyond. Not the darkness of an unlit hallway, but a complete void, as if the hallway itself had ceased to exist. From this darkness, a hand emerged, pale, skeletal, with elongated fingers and blackened nails. It reached toward me, fingers splayed wide, moving with unnatural, jerky movements like a spider. Something in me snapped. Pure survival instinct took over, and I launched myself toward the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and braced myself against it, my mind racing for an escape route. The small window above the toilet was my only option. I climbed onto the toilet tank, which wobbled precariously beneath me, and forced the window open. It was small, barely wide enough for my shoulders, but adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I heard the bathroom door handle turning as I squeezed through the window, scraping my back and arms on the frame. I landed hard on the ground outside, pain shooting through my ankle. I didn't stop to assess the damage, just ran, limping and stumbling toward my car. My hands shook so violently I dropped the keys twice before getting the car door open. As I started the engine, I looked back at the motel. The entire building seemed to waver, like heat rising from asphalt. The lights flickered in sequence down the length of the building, and for a moment, I thought I saw multiple faces pressed against the windows of each room. I floored it, tires spinning on gravel before catching and launching me onto the highway. I drove with my heart in my throat, constantly checking the rearview mirror. About a mile down the road, I looked back one last time, and the motel was gone. Not hidden by distance or darkness, but completely gone. Where it had stood was nothing but an empty field. I drove until sunrise without stopping, until I reached a truck stop with other people, other cars, normality. My ankle was swollen and my back was covered in scratches that took weeks to heal. I checked maps later and found no record of any riverside motel in that area. In fact, I couldn't even pinpoint exactly where I'd been that night. It was as if that stretch of highway existed in some in-between place. I've tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, some kind of waking dream, but I know what I experienced was real. Sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear that tapping start again. 3 quick taps, pause. 3 quick taps. And that whisper comes floating back to me. Room for one more. I never finished my cross-country trip. I drove straight home after that and haven't traveled alone since. I don't know what that place was or what would have happened if that hand had reached me. All I know is that somewhere out there, a motel appears to weary travelers, offering rooms that aren't meant for the living. And sometimes, late at night, I check all my doors and windows twice, because I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that doorway is still looking for me, still whispering, room for one more. Story 13. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or the supernatural. At least I wasn't until last October. I've spent months trying to rationalize what happened, but I can't explain it. I need to get this off my chest. I've worked at Mel's Diner in Riverdale for almost 3 years now. It's nothing special, just your typical small-town greasy spoon where locals come for cheap coffee and decent burgers. I usually work the evening shift, closing up around 11 at night. Last October 23rd, I was working a double because Tanya called in sick. By the time I finished my shift, it was nearly midnight and I was exhausted. My eyes were burning from being under those fluorescent lights for 14 hours straight. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The weather had turned that day. October in Riverdale usually brings this heavy fog that rolls in from the lake and settles over everything like a blanket. This particular night was especially bad. The kind of fog where your headlights just bounce back at you and you can barely see 10 feet ahead. My apartment is about 35 minutes from the diner, and most of that drive is along Route 16, a 2-lane highway that cuts through woods and farmland. During the day, it's actually pretty scenic, but at night, especially in fog, it's eerily deserted. Sometimes I won't see another car for the entire drive. I remember sitting in my car in the diner parking lot, blasting the heat and waiting for my windshield to defrost. The radio was playing some oldies station. I think it was Ain't No Sunshine by Bill Withers. I pulled out of the lot around 12:15, already dreading the drive home. The fog was so thick that I had to slow down to about 40 miles per hour, hunched forward in my seat, straining to see the yellow center line. My high beams just made it worse, creating this white wall in front of me, so I switched to low beams. The trees on either side of the road were just dark shapes looming in my peripheral vision. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes when I saw him. At first, it was just a shape on the side of the road, a shadow that seemed darker than the rest. As I got closer, my headlights caught him. A man standing with his thumb out. A hitchhiker. Now, I never pick up hitchhikers. My dad drilled that into me since I was old enough to drive. You never know who you're letting into your car, he always said. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was because it was such a terrible night to be stuck outside. Or maybe because we were in the middle of nowhere, at least 10 miles from any town. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him and watched in my rearview mirror as he jogged toward my car. He was tall and thin, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. Nothing particularly memorable about him except maybe how normal he looked for someone hitchhiking on a deserted highway after midnight. When he opened the passenger door, a blast of cold air hit me. I remember thinking it was much colder than it should have been, even for October. "Thanks for stopping," he said, sliding into the seat beside me. Not many people would on a night like this. "No problem," I replied, putting the car back in drive. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he said vaguely. "I'm Daniel, by the way." Jacob, I said, not offering my last name. Despite my moment of compassion, I wasn't completely throwing caution to the wind. As I pulled back onto the road, I got my first good look at him in the glow from the dashboard lights. He was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, with dark hair and pale skin. His clothes weren't dirty or worn like you might expect from someone hitchhiking. They looked almost new, and I noticed he didn't have a backpack or any kind of bag with him, which struck me as odd. "So what brings you out here at this hour?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "I'm looking for someone," he said after a pause. Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't threatening exactly, but there was an intensity to his voice that didn't match his calm demeanor. "Family?" I asked. "Something like that," he replied, looking out the window at the fog-shrouded trees passing by. The conversation felt strained, so I reached to turn up the radio. That's when the first really strange thing happened. As soon as my hand touched the volume knob, the music cut out, replaced by static. I fiddled with it, trying different stations, but all I got was that harsh white noise. "Sorry about that," I said. "Reception can be spotty out here." Daniel didn't respond. When I glanced over, he was still staring out the window, his reflection pale in the glass. I noticed his breath wasn't fogging up the window, despite how cold it was. The next 10 minutes of driving were some of the most uncomfortable of my life. The silence in the car felt heavy, broken only by the sound of my tires on the wet asphalt. I kept trying to think of something to say, but every conversation starter died in my throat. I was hyper-aware of his presence beside me. There was something off about him that I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, barely moving except for his eyes, which occasionally flicked to look at something in the darkness outside. Or maybe it was the fact that despite having the heater cranked up, the car still felt ice cold on the passenger side. We were approaching a small bridge that crosses over Mill Creek when Daniel suddenly spoke up. "You can let me out here," he said. I looked around in confusion. We were in the absolute middle of nowhere, just woods on both sides of the road, no lights, no houses, nothing. "Here? Are you sure? There's nothing around for miles." "This is where I need to be," he insisted, his voice taking on an odd, hollow quality. Part of me was relieved to have an excuse to end this uncomfortable ride, so I slowed down and pulled over just before the bridge. As soon as the car stopped, Daniel opened his door. "Thanks for the ride, Jacob," he said, looking at me directly for the first time. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light, and they seemed to hold me there for a moment. "No problem," I managed to say. "Good luck finding whoever you're looking for." A strange smile crossed his face. "I'm not the one who's lost," he said cryptically. Before I could ask what he meant, he stepped out and closed the door. I watched in my side mirror as he walked toward the bridge, his figure quickly swallowed by the fog. Within seconds, I couldn't see him anymore. I sat there for a minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then I put the car in drive and got the hell out of there, driving faster than was safe in those conditions. About 15 minutes later, I spotted the neon lights of a roadside diner called the Night Owl. I hadn't planned to stop, but suddenly I needed to be around other people to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the place opened. Her name tag read Doris. I took a booth by the window and ordered coffee when she came over. "Nasty night to be driving," she commented, filling my cup. "Yeah," I agreed. "Especially on Route 16, the fog's terrible." She nodded knowingly. "That stretch can be tricky even in good weather. You come far?" "From Riverdale," I said. "I picked up a hitchhiker back there, which probably wasn't the smartest move." Doris paused, coffee pot hovering over my cup. "A hitchhiker? Where'd you pick him up?" "About 20 minutes back, just before Mill Creek Bridge. Guy named Daniel. Dressed in jeans and a dark jacket. No bags or anything. Kinda strange. Asked to be dropped off right at the bridge." The color drained from Doris's face. She slowly put the coffee pot down on the table, her hand visibly shaking. "Young man, with dark hair, kinda quiet?" she asked. My stomach dropped. "Yeah, that's him." "Why?" Doris slid into the booth across from me, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "About 5 years ago, there was an accident on that bridge. A young man was walking along Route 16 late at night when he was hit by a car. Driver was drunk, didn't even stop. By the time someone found him, he was gone." I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What was his name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Daniel Mercer," she said. "Local boy. They found his wallet, but no bags or belongings, just like you described." My hands went numb around my coffee cup. "That's impossible," I said. "The guy I picked up was real. He got in my car, we talked. I felt the door open and close." Doris just looked at me with pity. "You're not the first, honey. Every few months, someone comes in here with the same story, always the same description, always asking to be let out at the bridge. But that's..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what she was telling me. "They say he's still looking for the driver who hit him," Doris continued. "Or maybe just trying to get home. Who knows why spirits do what they do?" I must have looked as sick as I felt because she reached across and patted my hand. "Drink your coffee, honey. It'll help with the shock." I gulped it down mechanically, barely tasting it. All I could think about was Daniel, his cold presence, the radio static, the way he vanished into the fog, the way he said, "I'm not the one who's lost." I paid for my coffee and left a big tip, then got back in my car. The fog had started to lift, but I still drove well below the speed limit all the way home, my eyes constantly darting to the passenger seat and the rearview mirror. That was 3 months ago. I've switched to the day shift at the diner and found a new route home, even though it adds 20 minutes to my commute. I can't bring myself to drive past that bridge again, especially at night. I've spent countless hours researching Daniel Mercer, and everything Doris told me checks out. There are newspaper articles about the hit and run, photos from his funeral, even a small memorial his parents put up near the bridge. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if I picked up a ghost, or if I'm losing my mind, or if it was some elaborate prank. But I know what I experienced. I felt the cold. I heard his voice. I watched him walk away. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, the radio will suddenly cut to static for no reason. And just for a second, in my peripheral vision, I think I see someone sitting in my passenger seat. But when I look, there's no one there. I still haven't told many people this story. Who would believe me? But I know what happened, and I know I'll never forget the night I gave a ride to Daniel Mercer, a man who died 5 years before I met him. Story 14. I still feel sick thinking about what happened on that ship. It's been 3 months since the Elysium's maiden voyage, and I haven't been able to sleep properly since. I'm writing this down partly to process everything, but also because people deserve to know the truth about what really happened, not the sanitized version that made the news. I'd been working myself to the bone finishing my doctoral thesis on maritime disasters when my sister gifted me this cruise as a birthday present. "You need a break, Anna," she insisted. 5 days in the Bahamas on that fancy new ship everyone's talking about. I was reluctant at first. I've always preferred museums to beaches, but the idea of disconnecting from my research and emails for a few days was tempting. The MV Elysium was being hyped as the most luxurious cruise liner ever built. The media coverage was relentless, talking about its revolutionary design, unprecedented amenities, and how it was redefining modern cruise travel. Tickets had sold out within hours of going on sale. My sister had somehow pulled strings through her job in corporate events to get me a solo cabin. When I arrived at the New York terminal that Thursday morning, the Elysium dominated the skyline. It was massive, 18 decks high with this sleek, almost predatory profile. The hull was painted midnight blue with gold accents, making it look more like a billionaire's yacht than a cruise ship. The boarding process was surprisingly efficient, and I remember feeling a weird sense of anticipation as I walked up the gangway. My cabin was on deck 8, midship. It was beautiful, all cream and navy with polished wood accents and a small private balcony. The bathroom was marble, and there was an actual king-sized bed. After unpacking my few belongings, I decided to explore before the mandatory safety drill. The ship was genuinely impressive. Crystal chandeliers, plush carpeting, artwork that probably cost more than my annual salary lining the corridors. 6 restaurants, 3 pools, a theater, spa, casino, all designed with this weird mix of ultra-modern luxury and subtle nautical themes. I remember thinking it felt both extravagant and somehow hollow, like a film set of what luxury should be rather than something authentic. We departed around 4 in the afternoon. I was on the upper deck watching Manhattan recede when I first noticed something odd. There was this older man, captain's uniform, white beard, standing near the railing, staring not at the view, but at the passengers with this deeply troubled expression. When he caught me looking, he quickly turned away. I didn't think much of it at the time. That first evening passed pleasantly enough. I had dinner at the main restaurant, watched part of the welcome show, and even had a cocktail at one of the bars. By 11, I was exhausted and headed back to my cabin. That's when the first truly strange thing happened. The corridor leading to my room was completely dark, not dimmed for nighttime, pitch black. I used my phone's flashlight and noticed all the wall sconces were off. As I walked, I swear I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was nobody there. When I reached my cabin door, the lights suddenly flickered back on all at once. I convinced myself it was just some electrical issue on a new ship. I fell asleep quickly, but woke around 3 in the morning to my bathroom door slowly swinging open. I hadn't left it open, and there was no draft. The cabin was completely still. Then the door gently closed again. My heart was racing, but I told myself it must be the ship's movement affecting the door somehow. When I finally fell back asleep, I had this vivid nightmare about water filling my cabin while dozens of hands pressed against my window from the outside, like they were trying to get in. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. At breakfast the next morning, I overheard a couple at the next table talking in hushed voices about a missing passenger. Apparently their friend had gone for a late-night walk and never returned to their cabin. Security was supposedly searching the ship. I didn't think too much about it, assumed they'd probably met someone and spent the night elsewhere. But by lunchtime, the atmosphere on the ship had changed. There were security personnel everywhere, and announcements kept requesting various passengers report to guest services. People were whispering that 3 more people were unaccounted for. No official announcement was made, which seemed strange. The crew members I asked just gave rehearsed responses about looking into some reports and assured us everything was fine. That afternoon, I decided to do some exploring of the lower decks, partly out of curiosity, partly to distract myself from the growing unease. The ship's layout was confusing. Corridors that seemed to circle back on themselves, staircases that didn't align with the deck maps. I eventually found myself on what must have been deck 3 or 4, in a quiet area away from the main passenger spaces. The decor was different here, older looking with darker wood paneling and brass fixtures that seemed at odds with the modern design elsewhere. I followed a long corridor that wasn't on any of the ship maps. It ended at a door marked "Crew Only, Restricted Access." Normally I wouldn't trespass, but something about this area felt wrong, and my historian's curiosity got the better of me. The door was unlocked. It opened into another corridor, but this one was entirely different from the rest of the ship. It looked like something from a much older vessel, narrow with peeling paint and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. The air was colder here, with this musty, damp smell like old paper and seawater. Along both sides were cabin doors, small, old-fashioned ones with tarnished brass number plates. What struck me as odd was that there were name plaques beneath each number, but they were all blank, just empty brass holders where names should have been. I counted at least 30 cabins along that corridor. As I walked, the lights started flickering, and I felt this pressure in my ears, like when you're in an airplane that's descending too quickly. I reached the end of the hallway, where there was one larger door with Purser etched into a plaque. That's when I heard it, a voice right behind me, barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. They'll find you too." I spun around and nearly screamed. There was a man standing there, maybe in his 60s, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned officer's uniform, not like the modern ones the Elysium's crew wore. His skin had this grayish pallor, and his eyes, I'll never forget his eyes. They were milky, almost clouded over, but somehow intensely focused on me. "You need to help us find them," he said. His voice had this strange quality, like it was coming through water or static. I backed away, asking who he was, what he meant. He just kept repeating, "Help us find them before it's too late." When I blinked, he was gone, completely vanished. I'm not spiritual or superstitious, but I know what I saw. I tried to leave, but the door I'd entered through was now locked. Panic set in as I rattled the handle. That's when I noticed all the cabin doors slowly opening, just a few inches each, all in perfect synchronization. I'm not ashamed to admit I completely lost it then, ran to the end of the corridor and found a small porthole window that, thankfully, was large enough for me to squeeze through. It opened onto a narrow maintenance deck. I made my way back to the main areas of the ship, shaking and trying not to look completely deranged. When I got back to my cabin, I immediately searched online for information about the Elysium. The ship's history seemed oddly sparse for such a high-profile vessel. Construction had apparently begun 8 years ago, then halted for redesign, only to resume 3 years later, under new ownership. There was no mention of the architect or design firm, which seemed strange for a ship of this caliber. That evening, instead of attending the captain's dinner, I went to the ship's security office. I claimed I'd lost something in one of the lower decks and asked to review security footage to see where I'd been. The young officer was reluctant, but eventually agreed when I insisted. What we saw on those screens haunts me still. The footage showed several passengers on different nights entering that restricted corridor, but none of them ever came out. When I asked to see footage of myself in that hallway from earlier that day, the screen showed only static. The officer seemed confused, said it must be a technical issue, but I could see fear in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft knocking on my balcony door, which should have been impossible since we were at sea. When I looked through the curtains, there was nothing there, but the glass was fogged with condensation that slowly formed words. "Below deck, midnight tomorrow." I spent the next day gathering information and looking for allies. I approached a few passengers who seemed equally disturbed by the strange occurrences. A retired naval engineer named Martin, a young doctor named Priya, and an elderly woman, Rose, who kept insisting she'd seen her late husband on board. None of us could get straight answers from the crew about the missing passengers, who now reportedly numbered 12. At 11:30 that night, the 4 of us met and made our way down to the restricted area. Martin had managed to obtain a master key card from a maintenance worker who'd become concerned about being ordered to avoid certain areas of the ship. The corridor looked different this time. The walls seemed to be sweating moisture, and the air was thick with fog that shouldn't have been possible indoors. All the cabin doors were open now, and each room was identical. Empty except for a small bed and a porthole that showed not the ocean outside, but different scenes that couldn't possibly be real. One showed New York Harbor circa 1930s. Another displayed what looked like a tropical storm. A third revealed an endless stretch of ice. When we reached the end of the hallway, the purser's door opened on its own. Inside wasn't an office, but a vast, impossible space that couldn't physically fit within the ship. It was filled with swirling mist, and through that mist we could see dozens of figures, men, women, children, all with that same grayish pallor. Some wore clothing from different eras. They moved toward us with outstretched hands, their voices overlapping in a horrifying chorus of pleas. Rose collapsed, screaming that her husband was among them. Priya tried to help her while Martin and I backed toward the door. That's when the elderly captain I'd seen earlier appeared behind us, blocking our exit. "You weren't supposed to find this place," he said quietly. Nobody was. He explained everything as the ghostly figures circled around us. The Elysium hadn't been built from scratch. Its core, the lower decks, had been salvaged from vessels that had disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle over the decades. The design was intentionally confusing, created to trap people in certain areas where the barrier was thinnest. "They need souls to replace their own," he said. "Souls to free them from their limbo. The company knows. They've always known. Why do you think we never stay in the triangle? We just skirt its edges, enough to activate what's been built into the ship." We managed to escape when the ship suddenly lurched, throwing everyone off balance. The captain disappeared into the mist as we fled. By morning, we'd reached port in Miami instead of continuing to the Bahamas. Some official story about mechanical issues was given and we were all evacuated. The Elysium was quietly towed back to New York Harbor, where it remains docked today. No official explanation has ever been given. The cruise line issued refunds and made us sign NDAs, which I'm breaking by writing this. 16 passengers were ultimately reported missing, explained away as accounting errors in the manifest. I've spent weeks researching the ships that disappeared in the triangle, matching dates with faces I saw in that misty room. I've found 12 confirmed matches so far. Sometimes I still hear knocking on my bedroom window at night, and when I check, there's condensation with half-formed words. I don't know why they let us go or what they really wanted. All I know is that the Elysium never sailed again, and if you go to the harbor where it's docked and look carefully at night, you can sometimes see lights moving in cabins that should be empty. Story 15. I never wanted to go to that place. I really didn't. But when you're part of a podcast team and everyone's excited about the perfect Halloween episode, you kind of get pulled along. That was 2 weeks ago, and I still haven't slept right since. I keep the lights on now. My roommate thinks I'm crazy, but she wasn't there. She didn't see what we saw at Cedar Grove. Let me back up. I'm part of this paranormal podcast called Haunted Truth with my friends from college, Mark, Sarah, and David. We started it as a joke our sophomore year, just exploring local haunted spots around campus that were actually just old buildings with creaky floors. Nothing serious. But we built up a small following and people seemed to like our chemistry, even if we never found anything truly unexplainable. Then David got this brilliant idea for Halloween, Cedar Grove Asylum. If you're from New Hampshire, you probably know about it. This massive Victorian-era mental institution hidden deep in the woods about an hour from our campus. It closed down in the 60s after some patients supposedly broke out and, well, the stories vary. Some say they attacked staff, others say they just vanished into the woods. Either way, the place has been abandoned for decades, slowly rotting away. Local people avoid it. There are all these stories about lights in the windows when there's no electricity, screams at night, figures watching from the upper floors. Typical ghost story stuff, right? I didn't believe any of it. I just thought it would be creepy because, well, abandoned asylums are inherently creepy. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon on Halloween. We wanted plenty of daylight to set up our equipment, get establishing shots, and familiarize ourselves with the layout before nightfall. The drive there was tense. The GPS stopped working about 20 minutes in, and we had to navigate using screenshots David had taken of maps beforehand. The road narrowed to barely more than a dirt path, with trees pressing in on both sides. "Are you sure this is right?" I remember asking. "This doesn't look like a road that leads anywhere important." "That's why it's perfect, Emily," David said, grinning in the rearview mirror. "If it was easy to find, it would be overrun with teenagers and ghost hunters." Sarah was on her phone, trying to get a signal. "When was the last time anyone actually came here to investigate?" "Some urban explorers posted photos about 3 years ago," Mark said. "But they didn't stay overnight. That should have been our first warning. When we finally arrived, the asylum was imposing, doesn't really capture it. It loomed. 3 stories of weathered brick and stone with towers at each corner like some medieval castle. Most of the windows were broken and vines crawled up the walls. The front doors were massive wooden things with rusted iron handles. "Holy shit," Sarah whispered. "It's bigger than I thought." We unloaded our gear, cameras, audio recorders, some basic ghost hunting equipment David had bought online, EMF meters, temperature gauges, that kind of stuff. I remember feeling a heaviness in the air, like right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. The front doors were chained shut, but someone had broken a side window large enough for us to climb through. The glass crunched under our boots as we entered what must have been a reception area. The place smelled like mold and something else, something chemical I couldn't place. The main hall was huge, with a staircase at the center that split in 2 directions. Peeling paint hung from the ceiling in strips. There was graffiti on some walls, the usual stuff, pentagrams and "Help Me" written in what I hoped was red paint. But other areas looked untouched, like no one had been there in decades. What really got to me were the items left behind. A wheelchair tipped on its side, filing cabinets with patient records spilling out, even some medical equipment that looked medieval, things with straps and metal parts whose purpose I didn't want to consider. "This place is perfect," David said, his voice echoing in the empty space. He was already setting up the main camera. "We'll use this as our base and explore in teams." "Teams?" I didn't like the sound of that. "Yeah, we'll cover more ground. Sarah and I will take the east wing, you and Mark take the west. We'll meet back here in 2 hours. I wanted to object, but Mark was already nodding. "We'll check out the patient wards. The blueprints showed the isolation cells were that way." Great. Isolation cells. Just what I wanted to see. We separated around 5:30. The sun was starting to get low, casting long shadows through the broken windows. Mark and I headed down a long corridor lined with doors. Most were patient rooms, small spaces with rusted bed frames bolted to the floor. Some still had names scratched into the walls. "This is incredible," Mark kept saying, filming everything. "The podcast listeners are going to freak out." I was less enthusiastic. Something about this place felt wrong. Not just abandoned building wrong, but wrong. Like we weren't supposed to be there, like we were being watched. "Did you hear that?" I asked at one point. Mark stopped walking. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard whispering." He smiled. "Already getting spooked? We haven't even hit the scary part yet." The isolation ward was at the end of a narrow staircase that led down, not up. That struck me as odd. Why put isolation cells below ground level? The air got colder as we descended and the smell changed. Less mold, more antiseptic, old chemicals. The isolation cells were tiny, maybe 6 by 8 feet. No windows, just solid doors with small slots for passing food through. Most of the doors were open or missing, but a few were still intact. "Look at this," Mark whispered, shining his flashlight on the interior walls of one cell. They were covered in scratch marks, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, some spelling out words I couldn't make out, others just frantic lines. "Someone was desperate to get out," I said, "or something was trying to get in," Mark replied, and I wished he hadn't. We moved deeper into the isolation ward, documenting everything. Mark was getting great footage, narrating about the conditions these patients must have endured. I was just trying not to touch anything. That's when it happened. We entered the last cell in the corridor, larger than the others, with restraint hooks embedded in the walls. Mark went in first, and I followed, staying near the door. Something felt off about this room. The air was heavier somehow. "This must have been for the violent patients," Mark was saying. "Look at..." The door slammed shut behind us. I screamed and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Very funny, Emily," Mark said, turning around. "I didn't do anything. It closed by itself." He tried the handle. Nothing. We were trapped. "Hey!" He pounded on the door. "Hello? Sarah? David? Is anyone there?" No answer. Just our own breathing and the sound of Mark hitting the door. Our phones don't work down here, I said, panic rising in my throat. What do we do? Relax, the latch probably just stuck. These doors are ancient. He examined it more closely. Maybe we can... That's when we heard it, a scraping sound. Not from the door, but from behind us, from the corner of the cell. We both turned slowly. The beam from Mark's flashlight swept across the wall. There was someone there. Or something. A figure, crouched in the corner, impossibly thin with skin stretched tight over bones. Its head was bald and misshapen, eyes sunken so deep they looked like black holes in its face. And it was smiling at us. "Mark," I whispered, "tell me you see that." "I see it," he said, his voice shaking. "What the f..." The thing moved, fast. 1 second it was in the corner, the next it was lunging at us. I remember screaming. Mark's flashlight hit the floor, spinning, the beam catching glimpses of the thing as it seemed to flicker, like it wasn't fully solid. It made a sound, not a scream or a growl, but a whisper. Multiple whispers, like several voices talking at once. Then the door behind us suddenly swung open. We didn't hesitate. We ran, stumbling over each other in our panic to get out. I remember looking back once and seeing nothing in the cell. The thing was gone, but the whispers followed us up the stairs. We ran straight into Sarah and David in the main hall. They looked as terrified as we felt. "We need to leave," Sarah was saying, her face pale. "Now. Right now." "What happened to you?" Mark asked, still trying to catch his breath. David just shook his head. "We were in the East Wing, found the records room, then heard something. A child laughing." "There are no children here," I said. "We know that," Sarah snapped, "but we heard it. So we followed the sound to what looked like a playroom, and there was something there, small, like a child, but wrong. Its eyes were black, completely black. It spoke to us," David said, "not with one voice, but with many, like a crowd of people all whispering at once. The same whispers we'd heard. As if on cue, we all fell silent, listening. The whispers were still there, all around us now, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, getting louder." "We need to go," I said, grabbing my backpack. "Now." No one argued. We left most of our equipment behind, taking only what we could grab quickly. The whispers followed us to the window we'd entered through. As I climbed out, I swear I felt cold fingers brush against my ankle. We ran to the car without looking back. David fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before managing to start the engine. As we pulled away, I looked in the side mirror. There were figures in every window of Cedar Grove watching us leave. We drove in silence for a long time. It wasn't until we hit the main road that anyone spoke. "Did we get anything?" Sarah finally asked. "On camera, I mean." David nodded slowly. "I think so. My camera was recording the whole time." When we got back to campus, we reviewed the footage in David's dorm. Most of it was what you'd expect. Shaky camera work, dark corridors, our nervous commentary. But there was one clip from David's camera in the East Wing. Just for a fraction of a second, as he spun around in the playroom, there was a face. The same gaunt, hollow-eyed face Mark and I had seen in the isolation cell. We posted the episode a week later. It went viral almost immediately. Our subscriber count jumped from a few hundred to over 50,000 in days. People wanted more, but we're not going back. Not to Cedar Grove, not to any haunted location. We're done with that. Sarah's talking about turning the podcast into a true crime show instead, something with facts and evidence, not whatever we encountered. I still hear the whispers sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. I'll never forget what that thing in the isolation cell looked like, or how it moved, like it wasn't bound by normal physics. I've tried researching Cedar Grove's history since then, looking for any mention of patients who died in isolation or children who might have been kept there. But most of the records were destroyed when the place closed. All I know is that something is still there, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I feel like it followed us home. Story 16. I still don't know how to explain what happened to us at the Caldwell Hotel. It's been 3 weeks, and I haven't slept properly since. My therapist suggested writing it down might help, so here goes. I'm not expecting anyone to believe me, but I need to get this out. It was mid-October, and our fall break had just started. Me, Sarah, Jake, Mia, and Brendan had been planning a hiking trip in the Adirondacks for weeks. We're all seniors at Cornell, and with graduation looming, we wanted to make some memories before real life pulled us in different directions. The weather forecast changed last minute. A storm front was moving in faster than expected. We were already halfway to our destination when we found out, so we stopped at this little town called Pinecrest to figure out what to do. None of us wanted to head back to campus yet. We went to this diner, Molly's or Millie's, I can't remember, where this older waitress overheard us discussing options. She mentioned the old Caldwell Hotel up on Raven's Peak, about 20 minutes from town. Said it had been abandoned since the late 90s, but was still structurally sound. The building had apparently been in some legal limbo after the owner died with no heirs. You kids could check it out, but I wouldn't stay after dark, she said while refilling our coffees. Place has a reputation. Jake, always the one to bite, asked what kind of reputation. The waitress lowered her voice. People who go up there see things, hear things. Back in '87, a family of 4 checked in, and only the father came back down. Said the place took them. Police found nothing. Mia rolled her eyes. Every small town has a haunted building story. I remember the waitress just shrugged and said, "Suit yourselves." I should have listened. We all should have listened. We drove up around 4 in the afternoon. The road was overgrown, and Jake's Subaru struggled on the steep incline. The hotel itself was this massive Victorian-style building, 4 stories of weathered grey stone with these huge bay windows. Most of the glass was intact, surprisingly. A wide veranda wrapped around the front, the wood rotting in places. We parked and just stared at it for a minute. The silence was heavy. No birds, no wind, nothing. Even though it was only late afternoon, the sky seemed darker up there, like the mountain had its own weather system. "This is already better than some boring cabin," Brendan said, grabbing his backpack. Inside, the lobby was huge. A grand staircase curved up to the upper floors, and a massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, covered in cobwebs but otherwise intact. The reception desk still had an old sign-in book open, the last entry dated May 15th, 1998. Dust covered everything, but weirdly, no graffiti or signs of squatters. "This place is perfect," Sarah said, already taking pictures on her phone. "Instagram is going to eat this up." We split up to explore the first floor, a dining room with tables still set with moldy tablecloths, a lounge with dusty sofas and a grand piano, and a bar with bottles still lined up behind it. Jake found a bottle of whiskey that was still sealed and declared it a sign from the universe. As the sun started to set, we set up our camping area in the lobby near the grand staircase. We had sleeping bags, battery-powered lanterns, and enough food for what was supposed to be our 3-day hiking trip. We even got a small fire going in the massive stone fireplace, which wasn't exactly safe, but the chimney seemed clear enough. The whiskey made its rounds. We told ghost stories, laughed, took pictures. It felt like exactly the adventure we'd been looking for. Around 9, Sarah suggested we each explore a different floor and report back anything cool we found. "Let's make it a contest," she said, her cheeks flushed from the whiskey. "Whoever finds the creepiest thing wins." I got the second floor, which had mostly standard hotel rooms. Nothing special. Musty beds, peeling wallpaper, abandoned suitcases in some. I found a child's teddy bear in one room that gave me a weird feeling, but I figured it would be my entry in the creepy contest. When I got back to the lobby, Jake was already there with a jar containing what looked like specimens floating in cloudy liquid from some kind of office. Brendan had found a collection of bizarre taxidermy in the basement, a 2-headed fox and some kind of unidentifiable creature. Mia returned looking pale. She'd been assigned the 4th floor and said the entire hallway was filled with mirrors, every one of them covered with sheets. She hadn't removed any of the coverings because, as she put it, I'm not a complete idiot in a horror movie. We waited for Sarah, but she didn't come back. After 20 minutes, we started calling for her. Nothing. She's probably trying to scare us, Brendan said, but I could tell he was getting worried too. We decided to check the third floor together. The hallway was L-shaped, with rooms branching off on both sides. The carpet was this faded red pattern that seemed to shift in our flashlight beams. We called Sarah's name as we checked each room. We found her in what must have been the hotel's largest suite, at the very end of the hallway. She was standing perfectly still in front of a huge mirror, at least 7 feet tall, with an ornate gold frame that was tarnished black in places. The mirror was filthy, covered in grime and dust, except for a clean handprint in the center. "Sarah?" I said. She didn't respond, just kept staring. When I put my hand on her shoulder, she jumped and turned around. "Oh my God, you scared me," she said, laughing. But something was off about her laugh. It was too high, too forced. "You okay?" Mia asked. We were worried. "I'm fine. I just found this and got distracted." Sarah turned back to the mirror. "Isn't it beautiful?" None of us thought it was beautiful. It was unsettling, out of place even in this decaying hotel. While the other furniture in the room was covered in a thick layer of dust, the mirror looked used somehow, like someone had been tending to it. "Let's go back downstairs," Jake suggested. "This floor gives me the creeps." As we turned to leave, I glanced back at the mirror. For a split second, and I know how this sounds, I thought I saw Sarah still standing in front of it, even though she was next to me walking toward the door. I blinked, and the image was gone. Back in the lobby, Sarah kept talking about the mirror, how remarkable it was, how well preserved. She wanted to go back up and clean it properly, said she could see something special beneath the grime. "It's just an old mirror," Brendan said, pouring another shot of whiskey. "Probably not even worth anything." Around midnight, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. Jake had found working plumbing on the first floor, though the water ran rust-colored for a few minutes before clearing. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way past my sleeping friends. When I came back, Sarah was gone again. I woke Jake up immediately. "Sarah's not here." He groaned and checked his phone. "It's 12:43, man. She probably just went to the bathroom too." I was just there. She wasn't. We woke Mia and Brendan, and a sense of dread settled over us. Without even discussing it, we all knew where she'd gone. The third floor seemed different at night. The hallway felt longer, and the doors to the rooms were all closed, though I distinctly remembered us leaving, them open. The air was colder too, dense with a smell like wet soil and something metallic. The door to the suite was ajar, a dim light spilling out. None of us had left any lights on up here. Jake pushed the door open wider, and we all froze. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, which was now completely clean, not a speck of dust or grime. But that wasn't what stopped us cold. Sarah's reflection wasn't mimicking her movements. While Sarah stood with her arms at her sides, her reflection had its hands pressed against the glass from the inside, a wide smile stretching its face unnaturally. "Sarah?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah turned to us, but her eyes were wrong. Completely black, like empty sockets. "You should see yourselves in here," she said, but her voice had this echo to it, like two people speaking at once. "Everyone looks better in this mirror." I stepped forward, but Jake grabbed my arm, stopping me. "That's not Sarah," he hissed. The reflection in the mirror moved independently, stepping to the side so there were now two Sarahs visible, our friend in front of the mirror, and her reflection still inside it, smiling at us. Then the reflection put its leg through the surface of the mirror. The glass rippled like water as it stepped out, fully forming beside Sarah. Two identical figures, except one had those terrible black eyes and that unnatural smile. We ran. I don't remember deciding to run, we just did. All of us bolting for the hallway, for the stairs, for any way out of that nightmare. The hallway stretched before us impossibly. I swear it was longer than before, the end seeming to recede as we ran toward it. Behind us, I heard footsteps, not running, but a steady, unhurried walk. We finally reached the staircase and practically fell down it to the second floor. Jake was yelling that we needed to get out to get to the car. We hit the lobby and sprinted for the main doors. They wouldn't open. Jake and Brendan threw their weight against them, but they might as well have been trying to move the entire mountain. The windows were the same. The glass wouldn't break, not even when Mia swung a heavy brass candlestick at it. The back entrance, Brendan gasped. Through the kitchen. We ran through the dining room, knocking over chairs. The kitchen doors swung open easily, raising our hopes, but the exit there was sealed too. Not locked, but like the door had fused with the frame, becoming a solid piece. That's when the shadows started moving. At first I thought it was our flashlights creating the effect, but then I realized the darkness itself was taking shape. Figures emerged from the corners of the room, from under tables, from inside cabinets. They looked like people, but wrong. Their proportions distorted, their faces twisted in expressions of agony. One reached for Mia, its fingers elongating unnaturally as they neared her arm. She screamed and backed into me, and we stumbled back toward the lobby. The lobby was filled with them now, shadow people crowding every corner, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. And standing at the base of the grand staircase was Sarah, or what looked like Sarah, her black eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. Next to her was something else. It had the general shape of a person but seemed to shift and blur at the edges. It raised a hand and the shadows moved closer. "The mirror wants more," Sarah's voice said, but her lips didn't move. It's been so long since it had new faces. I felt something cold grip my ankle and looked down to see a shadow hand emerging from the floor. Brendan was already being dragged toward the staircase by 3 shadowy figures, his screams echoing off the high ceiling. Jake had his phone out, the screen illuminating his terrified face. "No signal, no signal," he kept repeating, his voice breaking. I remember Mia praying beside me, her words coming out in frantic gasps. The shadows were all around us now, their cold touch seeping through my clothes into my skin like ice water in my veins. The thing beside Sarah raised both arms now, and the mirror from upstairs was suddenly there, floating in the air before the staircase. Its surface rippled and bulged, faces pressing against it from the inside, hundreds of them, all screaming silently. I felt myself being lifted, drawn toward the mirror. Mia's hand slipped from mine. Jake was already halfway there, suspended in air, his body rigid with terror. The last thing I remember is the surface of that mirror stretching open like a mouth, and the cold so intense it burned. Then darkness. I woke up on the side of the mountain road, alone, the morning sun blinding me. My phone showed it was 7:15 a.m. and I had 17 missed calls from my parents. Apparently, I'd been missing for 3 days. Search and rescue found no trace of Sarah, Jake, Mia, or Brendan. Just their backpacks scattered around the hotel lobby. The authorities said the building showed no signs of recent occupation. Dust undisturbed, spider webs intact. I tried to show them the mirror, but when we reached the 3rd floor suite, it was pristine, not a speck of dust on its surface. The police officer shined his flashlight on it, and for a moment I thought I saw faces in the reflection behind us. My friends' faces, their expressions frozen in terror. The officer saw nothing, of course, just an old mirror in an abandoned hotel. They think my friends left me and went home, that we had a fight or played a prank that went wrong. They think a lot of things, none of which explain why I sometimes catch glimpses of Sarah standing behind me when I look in mirrors, or why my own reflection sometimes doesn't move when I do. I don't know if anyone will believe this. I'm not sure I would if I hadn't lived it. All I know is that I can't look in mirrors anymore, and I sleep with the lights on. And sometimes, late at night, I hear Sarah's voice whispering that the mirror wants me back, that it's only a matter of time. Story 17. I've never told this story to anyone besides my therapist. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this out. But after seeing other posts about Route 17, I realized I'm not the only one who's experienced something on that godforsaken stretch of road. Maybe writing this down will help me process it, or at least warn others to stay away. I've lived in Pine Ridge my whole life, a speck of a town nestled in the Appalachian foothills that most people drive through without noticing. For the past 3 years, I've been working at Mel's Diner just off the interstate, taking the late shift because the tips are better, and I've always been a night owl anyway. The late hours never bothered me. In fact, I used to love driving home after my shift ended around 1 in the morning. The roads were empty, and it gave me time to decompress after dealing with truckers and the occasional drunk college kids all night. Route 17 was my secret. It's this old highway that nobody really uses anymore since they built the interstate. It winds through the hills with all these abandoned businesses from the 50s and 60s, old motels with faded signs, gas stations with rusted pumps, a drive-in theater that's just a skeleton now. During the day, it's just depressing, but at night, there's something almost peaceful about it. It was like driving through a different time. Plus, it shaved about 15 minutes off my commute compared to taking the main roads. That night, God, I still get goosebumps thinking about it, was about 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday in late October. My shift had been particularly rough. We'd had a tour bus break down nearby, so the diner was slammed with cranky travelers until nearly closing time. By the time I clocked out at 1:15 in the morning, I was exhausted and irritable. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and crash. It was darker than usual when I pulled out of the diner parking lot. No moon, no stars, just pitch black. I remember thinking it was strange, but I didn't give it much thought as I turned onto Route 17. My old Chevy Impala, a hand-me-down from my dad, rumbled down the road, headlights cutting through the darkness. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show discussing conspiracy theories about missing hikers in national parks. About 10 minutes into my drive, I started feeling weird. The air inside my car suddenly felt heavy, like there was too much pressure. My chest tightened and I found it hard to take a full breath. My first thought was that I was having some kind of panic attack, which made no sense because I'd never had one before. I rolled down my window, hoping the fresh air would help, but it actually made things worse. The air outside felt even heavier, almost sticky against my skin. My palms started sweating so badly I had to repeatedly wipe them on my jeans to keep a grip on the steering wheel. My stomach knotted up like I'd eaten something rotten. I remember checking my rearview mirror constantly, convinced someone was watching me, but there was never anyone there, just darkness. As I passed mile marker 43, I remember the number clearly because I focused on it, trying to calm myself down. I saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a bear. We get wildlife crossing the roads all the time around here, but as my headlights swept over it, I realized it was a man. He was just standing there, not moving, not trying to flag me down for help, just standing perfectly still at the edge of the asphalt. He wore what looked like a dark coat, tattered at the edges. I couldn't see his face clearly. It was hidden in shadow. But his arms hung limply at his sides in this unnatural way, like they were too heavy for him. Something about how he was standing made my skin crawl. It wasn't normal. People don't just stand on the side of a deserted highway in the middle of the night, completely motionless. As I drove past him, he turned his head, just his head, not his body, and looked directly at me. I only saw his eyes for a split second in my headlights, but that was enough. They weren't human eyes. I don't know how to explain it better than that. They were too dark, too empty, like looking into holes punched through reality. My blood went ice cold, and I instinctively slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The speedometer jumped to 70, then 80. I was taking the curves way too fast, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from whatever that was. I kept checking my mirrors, terrified I'd see him running after my car or something, but the road behind me remained empty. After about 10 minutes of driving like a maniac, I started to calm down a little. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just some homeless guy or maybe a hunter. My imagination was running wild because I was tired and it was dark. I eased off the gas a bit, down to a more reasonable 60. That's when I saw her. She was standing directly in the middle of my lane, about 50 yards ahead. A woman, or something that looked like one. Her clothes were torn and dirty, hanging off her thin frame. Her hair was long and matted with what looked like mud or dirt. But it was her face that made me slam on my brakes so hard the car fishtailed. Her face was frozen in this silent scream, mouth stretched impossibly wide, eyes bulging. She was looking right at me, but also through me somehow. My car screeched to a halt about 20 feet from where she stood. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. My hands were shaking so badly, I could hear my keys jingling in the ignition. I blinked once, and she was gone. Not like she ran away or moved. She literally vanished. I sat there, hyperventilating, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to turn around and speed back toward town, but that would mean driving past the man again. Another part of me thought I should just abandon my car and run into the woods, but that seemed even more terrifying. So I did the only thing I could think of. I put the car in drive and kept going, praying I'd reach the turnoff to my neighborhood soon. That's when the fog rolled in. It came out of nowhere, thick and unnatural. 1 minute the road was clear, the next it was like driving through soup. My headlights barely penetrated it, reflecting back at me instead of illuminating the road. I slowed down to about 20 miles per hour, straining to see the yellow center line to keep from driving off the road. Then I saw the lights. They weren't headlights or streetlights. They were these strange, glowing orbs floating on either side of the road. Some were whitish blue, others a sickly yellow-green. They moved in these weird patterns, sometimes drifting alongside my car for a few seconds before suddenly blinking out. New ones would appear further ahead, like they were leading me somewhere. I checked the clock on my dashboard. 2:30 in the morning. That didn't make sense. I should have been home by now. Route 17 is only about a 25-minute drive from the diner to my neighborhood, and I'd been driving for over an hour. But the road just kept stretching out ahead of me, endless in the fog. Every time I thought I was making progress, I'd see them again. Sometimes the man in the coat, sometimes the screaming woman, sometimes both together, standing side by side. They never moved normally. They'd be in one spot, then suddenly appear in another without seeming to walk there, always watching me with those hollow eyes. No matter how fast I drove, they seemed to be following me, appearing at the edges of the road wherever I went. I started sobbing, pounding on the steering wheel, screaming at them to leave me alone. I tried turning the car around multiple times, but somehow I'd always end up facing the same direction again. It was like the road itself was changing, refusing to let me go. The radio started going haywire, cycling through stations by itself, voices cutting in and out. For a brief moment, it settled on what sounded like a children's choir singing something in a language I didn't recognize. Then static. Then whispers that didn't sound like they were coming from the speakers at all, but from the back seat of my car. I refused to look in the rearview mirror after that. At one point, my car engine started sputtering like it was about to die. I pulled over, not knowing what else to do. As soon as I stopped, the fog pressed against my windows like it was alive, searching for a way in. I could barely see anything outside, just vague, moving shapes in the mist. The temperature inside the car plummeted. I could see my breath. My teeth were chattering so hard I bit my tongue, tasting blood. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't make sense anymore. Eventually, I forced myself to try the engine again, and miraculously, it started. I pulled back onto the road, driving blindly through the fog. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted a sign ahead, an exit. I didn't care where it led, I just took it, desperate to get off Route 17. As soon as my tires hit the exit ramp, the fog thinned out. By the time I reached the connecting road, it was gone completely. The sky above was lightening with the first hints of dawn. I didn't recognize where I was at first. I followed the road until I hit a familiar intersection, about 5 miles from my house. Somehow, I'd exited Route 17 on the complete opposite side of town from where I normally would. I drove home in a daze, pulled into my driveway as the sun was coming up, and sat in my car for a long time, afraid to get out. I called in sick to work that day, and the next. When I finally went back, I took the long way home, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid Route 17. I still do, even now. I've never driven that road again, and I never will. Sometimes, when I can't sleep at night, I wonder if those figures are still there on Route 17, waiting for unwary travelers to pass through their domain. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that exit, or if my car had broken down completely. Would I still be there, trapped in that endless fog? Or would I have become something else, something like them? I don't know what I experienced that night. Maybe it was some kind of mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or maybe Route 17 really is haunted by something not of this world. All I know is that sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night, I catch glimpses of figures standing at the side of the road, out of the corner of my eye. And when I look directly at them, they're gone. Story 18. I've debated sharing this for years. Even now, almost 40 years later, I still wake up in a cold sweat some nights, convinced I'm back there, but I need to get this off my chest. It was the summer of 1983, and I had just finished my 3rd year of college. I was 22, and like most guys that age, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. My dad was pushing me to go to law school, but I wasn't sure. I needed time to think, to clear my head. So I decided to take a solo backpacking trip along the Appalachian Trail in South Carolina. I wasn't some amateur either. I'd been backpacking since I was a kid. My Uncle Tom, who I was named after, used to take me camping all the time. I knew how to read a map and compass, how to pack efficiently, how to make a fire in the rain, all that survival stuff. I'd done several weekend trips alone before, but this was going to be my first week-long solo journey. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. Just me, the forest, and my thoughts. I followed the white blazes marking the trail, making good time despite the summer heat. I'd stop occasionally to take in the views or jot down thoughts in my journal. The physical exertion felt good, and being away from everyone's expectations gave me space to think, but everything changed on the 3rd day. I woke up early, broke camp, and hit the trail by 7 in the morning. The weather forecast had predicted thunderstorms later, so I wanted to cover as much ground as possible before they rolled in. The sky was overcast, casting a grayish tint over everything. The forest felt different that morning, quieter, like all the wildlife was holding its breath. Around midday, I stopped at a small clearing to eat lunch. I remember sitting on a fallen log, unwrapping a squished peanut butter sandwich, when this feeling just washed over me. It's hard to describe. It wasn't just uneasiness. It was dread, pure and primal. The hair on my arm stood up, and I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I scanned the tree line, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. That's when I saw him. About 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a large oak tree, stood a man. He wasn't dressed like a hiker, no backpack, no proper boots, just dark clothes that seemed too heavy for the summer heat. He was completely still, just watching me. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded strange and small in the quiet forest. He didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. I'm not normally jumpy, but something about this guy triggered every alarm bell in my body. Without really thinking, I stuffed my sandwich back in my bag, grabbed my water bottle, and started walking, not running, but moving quickly. in the opposite direction. I didn't want to look panicked, but I needed to put distance between us. After about 10 minutes of fast hiking, I glanced back. No sign of him. I told myself to calm down, that he was probably just another hiker who didn't feel like socializing. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. I decided to pick up my pace and try to reach the next shelter marked on my map. It was supposed to be about 7 miles ahead, a few hours of hiking. The trail started to climb steeply and the day grew hotter and more humid. Dark clouds were gathering now, confirming the forecast. About an hour later, I stopped to catch my breath at a small stream. As I bent down to refill my water bottle, I saw it, a fresh footprint in the mud by the water's edge. It wasn't mine. I hadn't crossed this particular spot yet. The print was large, made by a boot, with a distinctive tread pattern I'd never seen before. Someone had been here very recently. I felt sick. Was he ahead of me now? How did he get in front of me without me seeing him pass by? Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was approaching faster than I'd expected. I needed to make a decision: continue to the shelter as planned, or find another route. I pulled out my map with shaking hands and saw there was an unmarked trail branching off about a quarter-mile ahead. It wasn't part of the official Appalachian Trail, but it looked like it might connect to a Forest Service road a few miles east. I decided to take that trail. Looking back, it was the worst decision I could have made. The unmarked path was overgrown and difficult to follow. Within an hour, I was pretty sure I'd lost the trail completely. The forest was getting denser, the terrain more rugged. The first fat raindrops began to fall, and soon I was trudging through a downpour. Between the rain and the fading light, my visibility dropped to almost nothing. That's when I realized I'd made a critical error. In my haste to get away from the man, I'd left my main pack at the clearing where I'd stopped for lunch. All I had was my small day pack with a water bottle, my map, now soaking wet and falling apart, a lighter, a pocket knife, and what was left of my sandwich. No tent, no sleeping bag, no proper rain gear. And night was coming. I was lost, underprepared, and increasingly certain that I was being hunted. The rain was coming down in sheets now. I needed shelter, fast. I scrambled up a rocky hillside, hoping for higher ground and maybe a better view of my surroundings. Instead, I found something better, a small cave entrance, just big enough for me to crawl into. I shined my small flashlight inside to check for animals, then crawled in. It wasn't deep, maybe 15 feet at most, but it was dry and offered protection from the storm. I huddled against the back wall, soaking wet and shivering. My watch said it was only 7 in the evening, but it was already getting dark outside due to the storm. I tried to calm myself down, to think logically. I was lost, yes, but I wasn't completely helpless. When the storm passed, I could try to find my way back to the main trail, or maybe I could locate that Forest Service road I'd seen on the map. I just needed to survive the night. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the cave entrance, and for a split second, I thought I saw a silhouette there, a human shape, watching from outside. I jerked back, heart pounding, but when the next lightning flash came, there was nothing, just rain and darkness. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself. I was letting my fear get the best of me. I must have eventually fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, weak morning light was filtering into the cave. The storm had passed, and birds were singing outside. For a moment, I felt relief. I'd made it through the night. I was still lost, still without most of my gear, but at least now I could see where I was going. I crawled stiffly toward the cave entrance, blinking in the morning light. And then I froze. Laid out neatly on a flat rock just outside the cave was my backpack. Not just that, my tent was set up perfectly beside it, as if ready for me to crawl in. My sleeping bag was spread out inside, my cooking gear arranged nearby. Everything I'd left behind at the clearing, miles away. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. How was this possible? Who had done this? And why? Then it hit me. The only explanation was that someone had followed me, watched me enter this cave, and then gone back to retrieve my things. They had known exactly where I was all night. They had been watching me sleep. I nearly threw up. This wasn't a random encounter. This was deliberate. Someone was toying with me. I didn't touch any of my gear. Instead, I backed into the cave, grabbed my small day pack, and slipped out, giving the arranged items a wide berth. I needed to get to civilization, fast. I orientated myself using the morning sun and started heading east, where I thought the Forest Service road might be. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, constantly checking behind me, stopping often to listen. The forest seemed normal in the daylight, birds singing, squirrels chattering, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. After about 2 hours of hiking, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hanging from a tree branch at about eye level was my college ID card, the one I'd kept in my wallet, in my backpack. It was suspended by a piece of fishing line, twisting slightly in the breeze, as if marking a trail for me to follow. I took the ID and kept moving, faster now. 20 minutes later, I found another item, my blue bandana tied around a tree trunk. Then my compass, balanced on a stump, my trail map, pinned under a rock. Someone was leaving a breadcrumb trail for me. But leading me where? I was terrified, but I kept following the items. They seemed to be heading in the direction I wanted to go anyway, and I hoped they might lead me to a road or town. Each time I found something of mine, I'd scan the surroundings, sure that I'd catch a glimpse of whoever was doing this, but I never saw anyone. Finally, after what felt like hours, the trees thinned out and I saw a gravel road ahead. Relief flooded through me. I broke into a run, desperate to reach it. As I emerged from the tree line, I saw an old pickup truck parked about 50 yards down the road. A man was leaning against it, smoking a cigarette. He looked up as I approached and smiled. "You look lost, son," he called out. "Need a ride somewhere?" Something about his voice made me hesitate. I couldn't see his face clearly from that distance, but something seemed off. I glanced down and noticed his boots, heavy, dark, with a distinctive tread pattern, the same pattern I'd seen in the footprint by the stream. "No thanks," I said, my mouth dry. "I'm meeting friends just up the road." His smile faltered slightly. "Ain't nothing up that way for miles. Come on, I'll give you a lift to town." I was backing away now, ready to run back into the forest if necessary. "I appreciate it, but I'm good." Just then, I heard the rumble of an engine behind me. A Forest Service truck was coming down the road from the opposite direction. I've never been so happy to see government employees in my life. The man by the pickup straightened up quickly, flicked his cigarette away, and got into his truck. He pulled away without another word, driving past me and the approaching Forest Service vehicle. I flagged down the forest rangers, who were understandably concerned about my appearance. I was dirty, scratched up, and probably looked half crazy. I told them I'd gotten lost and separated from my gear. I didn't mention the man or the arranged items. It sounded too bizarre, and I wasn't sure they'd believe me. They drove me to the nearest ranger station, where I called my parents to come get me. While I was waiting, I finally worked up the courage to tell one of the rangers about the strange man I'd seen watching me on the trail. The ranger's expression changed immediately. He asked me several questions: where exactly I'd been, what the man looked like, if he'd said anything to me. Then he left the room and came back with a local police officer. I repeated my story to the officer, who took detailed notes. When I finished, he exchanged a look with the ranger before telling me that 3 hikers had disappeared in that same general area over the past year. All solo hikers, all roughly my age. I felt sick again. The officer asked if I'd be willing to work with a sketch artist, but I had to tell him I'd never got a clear look at the man's face. My parents arrived a few hours later and took me home. I was too shaken to tell them everything that had happened. I just said I got lost during the storm and was rescued by forest rangers. I never went hiking alone again. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, to convince myself I'd overreacted to an unusual but ultimately explainable situation. Maybe it was just another hiker who found my abandoned gear and was trying to return it in a misguided way. Then, 5 years later in 1988, I got a call from that same police officer. They'd found something in those woods, a hidden bunker, dug into a hillside and carefully concealed. Inside were personal items from dozens of hikers: wallets, IDs, cameras, watches, clothing, and photographs. Hundreds of photographs of people hiking, setting up camp, sleeping, all taken without their knowledge. They never caught the person responsible. The bunker had been abandoned for some time when they found it. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, watching from the trees, waiting for hikers who look like they won't be missed. And sometimes in my nightmares I see my own sleeping face among those photographs.